I'm Scott Isle Miller. It is Sunday night. This is Nicaragua Live here from Leon, Nicaragua. And tonight we're going to be talking about the topic of what Nicaraguans need to understand. And of course, you're going to be able to apply this in reverse. Being able to see what's problematic for Nicaraguans will help you understand more. As a non-Nicaraguan, as an expat, as someone who may be looking at moving to, traveling to, or living in or investing in Nicaragua, we're going to be answering what Nicaraguans need to understand about American investing, because this is a very different thing than Nicaraguans have a tendency to be exposed to, and often, of course, from marketing and media and all that kind of stuff, they're going to be getting a very different perspective on the world than is reality, right? As long as you are stuck watching movies and television and newspapers, you are getting a fantasy world of information. And so sitting down and talking a little bit about what's actually different. And I think this is eye-opening for Americans because the United States is a vastly unique investing market. Not completely unique. Certainly Canada is somewhat similar. Much of Europe is somewhat similar, but that's about it. Once you get outside those zones, you get some similarities in big markets like China, but those similarities are relatively light. I'm having Victoria Classica this evening as we do this, so kick back and enjoy one yourself if you can. Drink them if you got them. While we're waiting for people to hop on this evening, I'm going to regale you with a little bit of story. Many of you know that my eldest daughter ended up in getting between a dog and a cat that were fighting, got bit, and needed to head to the hospital. We got to go through the whole getting rabies shots in in the emergency room and all those kinds of things, and tetanus shots, and dealing with that whole series and doing the whole thing, which of course is awesome. Healthcare in Nicaragua, sometimes confusing, but always very, very good. Funny, I was speaking with my niece, who is a nurse in the United States, and we were talking about the problems we had not having insurance coming back to the U.S., and she was unaware that you had to pay for healthcare in the United States and that people needed insurance. We were like, what? Yes, it would be very expensive for us to get healthcare in the United States. And yes, we would need insurance to be safe. And she was like, really? You have to have insurance? Not a lot of good info being disseminated about taxes and insurance and those kinds of things in the U.S., I fear, much of the time. So my youngest, last night, we heard our missing kitten. We have 3 kittens. One has been missing for a few days. They heard it in the backyard. We found it on top of the 20-foot wall and had to coax it down. And in the process, she got scratched up pretty badly and had to go to the hospital again. Or she had to go as well. She had to go to the hospital. And so another adventure in the Sutiaba Hospital for my daughters. It seems like it's going to be a recurring thing, perhaps. So, but again, everything completely free, everything super fast. And my daughter even, she's like, wait, you woke me up from bed, got dressed, got in a car, drove to Marcella's and got her just so we'd have a translator because she knows how to work with the hospital. Had to get her basically out of bed. Had to go speak to the guests that she had at her house, load her into the car, get to the hospital. I accidentally made a wrong turn because I was groggy. Get to the hospital, park, go into the hospital, go through the whole rigmarole of explaining to them and getting paperwork. And this is her first time in the hospital here, so they had to put her into paperwork and get her a card and stuff, and they got her shot, they got her cleaned up, not that she needed it, but they felt it was prudent, so they cleaned her up, did alcohol, got her a shot, got her a prescription, which, to be clear, the medical system here generally doesn't pay for your prescriptions, but paying out of pocket for the prescription was 105 Cordoba, and that's just under $3, so it's like $2.95 for her medicine for this. So that piece isn't free, but it's not done by the public healthcare system. They send you to the pharmacy for that. So Everything was free in the hospital. She got her vaccine, all that stuff. They checked her out. They're like, she's fine. They took the time to register the cats that we have, because they're outdoor cats, they're street cats, with the health ministry. So they're going to be sending vets out to come check on the animals and make sure that they're okay, and probably give them rabies shots, because they do, even wild animals or semi-wild animals, street cats and such, will get rabies shots here to just keep the place safe from rabies, which, again, the stories of there are no rabies shots in Nicaragua. I think there's no rabies shots in America. When's the last time that the United States had so many extra rabies shots that they were going out looking for wild or street animals to vaccinate? As far as I know, never. I'm sure they probably have at some point. But in general, it doesn't happen. In Nicaragua, it happens everywhere. And it's just automatic. You're like, hey, some street cats are living in my garage. Can I get them vaccinated? Yeah, for sure. They'll just come out and watch over the animals for you for free. Same thing. Your pets. Oh, my dog doesn't have a rabies shot. For free, right? They will come out and take care of you. Mine do have it, but just not the outdoor cat. So really impressive, right? Oh, Diego is here. He says hello, and it was he who prompted tonight's topic, so we'll be able to jump on there in a second. But so we got home, and my daughter remarked that it had been under an hour, and we dropped off Marcella on the way back. So that was a significant amount of the time. It was just going down her drive, going down her road, waiting for her to get into the house, and so forth out of that time. So under an hour from getting out of bed to being home, vaccinated with everything taken care of. We did not go to the pharmacy within that window. We would go in the afternoon. They said they have it with her lunch, so we waited till lunch to pick it up. Anyway, tonight's topic for Diego, who on last night's show made the comment, oh, it seems like it's a lot easier to invest or start a business in the United States. And I'm sure that is a true statement, right? The paperwork, the filings, the banking, the raising of funds, the finding of components in order to start a business in the United States is one of the better ones in the world, right? Not a bad place to start a business. And that's one of the things that it's really, really known for. Hey, Luke, how you doing? So the statement is very true. The United States is one of the best places to start a business from the process and taxes of a business perspective, and Nicaragua doesn't make the list of great places to do that. It doesn't make the list of terrible places to do that. It falls into a much harder than the super easy places, but really not all that bad kind of category. Could they make it a little bit easier? They could, and I would appreciate that, but it's not a huge deal. Starting a business in Nicaragua as a foreigner, where some of the easiest options are not available to you, is really still within anybody's reach. If you are a Nicaraguan, you get some really cool benefits that we don't get, and it would be nice if we got some of those sometimes, but mostly they wouldn't apply really, even if we were eligible for them. So it may not be that big of a deal due to the size and types of businesses that we often want to invest in. There are, for example, some specific types of businesses, categories in Nicaragua that are extremely easy to do from a starting and tax paying and all that perspective, but they are really designed around 1 to 2 person family businesses done out of the home. It's not 100% of the time done that way, but nearly always, right? So things that expats and foreign investors are really not looking for 99+% of the time. Once in a while, we hear about someone who's like, I just want to do this thing out of my house that would be really similar to a pulperia, at least in structure, and they can, but they can't do it in quite the same way that a Nicaraguan potentially can. So that's where there's sometimes a difference. But and Diego, feel free to jump in with thoughts and stuff because you're here. But the some of the ideas that came up, and he asked about this because as someone outside the United States, and even to most Americans, the idea that you're going to go to the United States and get venture capital is something that a lot of people feel like businesses just magically get venture capital, and I don't mean people like from Bolivia. I mean Americans, right? They imagine that it's very easy to go out and get venture capital. And the reality is that there's extremely little venture capital in the United States, more than anywhere else for sure. But there's still extremely, extremely little. And this is, America is a venture capital country. Some other places that are very rich, like Norway, have basically no venture capital. They're a hold and hoard our cash country. So it's very much I have to answer. This is kind of on investing. The book by Peter Lynch, One Up on Wall Street, is a book that my mother, who was a day trader, had me read when I was a teenager, I think. So interesting. So the idea that you're going to go out and get venture capital in the United States basically is a falsehood, right? Tons of people who don't go into business in America are like, yeah, venture capital. You just come up with an idea and people throw money at you. Hell no, not at all. That is absolutely not how it works. Generally, the way that it works is a few things. One is you are generally, there are exceptions, but you are generally a tech bro. You are someone who already has rich connections, generally parentage. You are in very specific industries, such as tech. You are living generally in a right area and have connections with people who are venture capitalists. And you then leverage family connections to get selected for those things. Very limited possibilities. And notice none of them are do a good job or make a product, right? These are all who you are born to be. If you do go and get this funding, it is almost always, with no exception that I know of, given to marketers and salesmen and soft skill people, never to technical people, to engineers, to people with products or stuff like that. The two really don't overlap. Again, somewhere there's an exception, but extremely, extremely unlikely. Now, that means that to normal people and to people who have business aspirations, these things are not within your reach. If this was within your reach, you would already have it, even as an American. The fact that it doesn't exist in other countries just is a sign that it's not something that has a lot of value. Other markets, now it's not necessarily the countries that decide this. If a group of rich Nicaraguans decided to get together and start a venture capital group, we certainly could. The government's not going to stop us. They're going to go, interesting, I don't know what's wrong with you, but go for it, right? Because it can help power the economy just because you're taxing the rich in some way. So fine, not a problem, right? They're going to give you the thumbs up and be like, have at this craziness. We don't, no one has ever done this outside the United States really, because it's a terrible idea, but whatever, right? But there's this culture of this, and it's kind of like a lottery in the United States. So with something like venture capital, it's important to understand a couple things. One, from the venture capitalist perspective, generally these are people with so much money they have no idea what to do with it, and they're looking for ways to make money while doing fun things. That's most of what the goal is, and so and this is very abstracted, but so as a venture capitalist, let's say you have $1 billion you want to put in. So you want to break that up. You don't want to put it all into one spot. So you pick 10 companies, and you don't need 10 companies to succeed. You need one company to succeed. So you pick 10 companies, and it's really hard to pick things that are good ideas. So they don't really bother. They don't look for things that are actually smart. I mean, they'll put a little bit of effort into it. I'm not saying zero. But it's not a deep research thing, because good ideas are not what bubbles to the top. Marketing bubbles to the top, right? Having the right connections bubbles to the top. But being good at business, irrelevant. And I mean truly irrelevant in the US market. Having a good product, irrelevant. Having a product, often irrelevant, right? Many companies that we see become famous actually do so with no product at all. Some famously, quite literally, never building anything. Right, completely fake. And you hear about this. Diego actually brought this up recently. Builder.ai, or whatever it's called, had raised $1.5 billion from Microsoft alone of venture capital. And Microsoft never did the research to see if the product was real, and it was not. And so Microsoft threw $1.5 billion away, but didn't just throw it away. Also made themselves a laughingstock. Now that's really saying something, because Microsoft is in general a laughingstock, right? Everything you could be stupid at as a company, Microsoft is. And it only makes money because it has money and connections, not because it has products or good ideas, right? Nothing good comes out under the Microsoft brand, and is the perfect example of the American business is a market you buy, not a market you work your way into, right? Social mobility in business should be 100%. Social mobility should be the thing that powers business. But instead, what we find in America is that there's very little social mobility within business, possibly far less than there is in education or other things where we have a little bit more control. Business is pretty much unregulated. And so most people are willing to keep the overall system much, much smaller for the purpose of keeping the money within family groups, right? Or within friend groups or whatever, within connections, so that there's always people to keep each other rich. So that's the idea from the investor perspective, is they have 10 things they invest in. They know 9 of them are almost guaranteed to just go out of business and see nothing for the money. $100 million on each, thrown away. And they know this. But the one that they don't have that happen to, they're hoping to make an outrageous return on it, much greater than 10 times, much closer to 20 times, right? So they put in $1 billion, they're hoping to get $2 billion out, but that means one single investment of $100 million needs to pay them $2 billion, or they're angry, right? Now, once in a while, you're going to get lucky and find 2 or 3 things that are successful, but far more likely, none of them are successful. Or you end up going into 30 and only 1 or 2 are successful, and you're a little bit less than 1 out of 10. Very general numbers. And not everyone has the exact same size investment, right? So from an outside perspective, venture capital in America, and just about anywhere, is what we call a greatest fool game. Once again, notice we're not talking about products. We're not talking about engineering. We're not talking about great ideas. We're talking about marketing scams. So the first venture capitalist gets in. Generally, this is an angel investor. This is a person who gets in with just, hey, these are some people that I'm friends with, is my rich buddy's kid, and you know, they're going to do me favors later, so I'm going to do him this solid. Once in a while, you get someone who's actually a businessman doing this, but almost always this is rich people favors. Then they help get a marketing plan together, right? Not a product, a marketing plan. Generally, somewhere there's an engineering team who is kind of making a product, but they're very disconnected from this. I've worked with venture capital where there was the venture team, the business team, the finance team, the marketing, sales, everybody all would spend their time in meetings together, and they had all this marketing and all this stuff. And when you went to engineering and talked to them, they weren't allowed to know what marketing was advertising. They had to go look on websites and see what ads were running to see what products they were being, that the world was being told they were building, but they weren't told to build those products. And so they were building different products, not like unrelated, right? They weren't making toasters and it was a car company, but they were making, in this particular example, software. They were told for one industry that needed to do one set of things, and the marketing was for a different industry and needed to do a different set of things. At no point, you're right, we're not even talking about like a project manager who got confused or a system designer who didn't understand the problems. This was the bulk of the company. 95% of the staff hid all knowledge of what the company's goal was as a business from the only department that was doing that business or trying to. And at no point in the history of that company did the two align, ever. That was early on. They went for a long time, but we're going to talk about the fool's game. So the angel investor hopes to make their money when a round A investor comes in. Round A. That means you go out and you start pitching to venture capitalists. That angel is a VC, but we generally don't think of them. We call them an angel. Now we're looking for the VCs, right? So these are the round A VCs are the people who put in the small money, but it's very risky, right? Maybe they're putting in 10 million. They put in 10 million, they help you get started. Sometimes they bring some resources to help you. More often, those resources cripple you, right? But they're using the 10 million they gave you to siphon off money to other businesses that they own. So it's not a real donation. It sounds great, but is it real? Not normally. They help you market your product, whether it exists or not, or kind of, to a round B group. Now, generally, this is after a period of a year or two. This is not happening overnight. And then the round B is maybe you're going to get 100 million of investment, right? So now you're getting more hype. There's way more marketing budget. These people are putting in way more money, which is risky, but they've already gone through the angel and the round A. So they know that it's been running for some time. So there's something to show, right? Generally not a product, just processes and management and marketing and that kind of stuff. Sometimes a good user base is starting to appear, but the users may not actually be using the product that you're talking about or be real users at all. Again, the company that I worked with, by somewhere around round B, was claiming more than 1 million users. I spoke to some of their people and helped them do some deep research, and what they generally classified as users was actually about 125, right? 125 is a very long way from 1 million, but there's nothing to hold you accountable in the venture capital world. So they just said 1 million and just stuck to their guns. And when they finally got investors, those investors did nothing to look to see if they were buying something real. It was completely a scam. I don't mean kind of a scam. I mean full on, 100% a scam. And that's right. That's why it's called a greatest fool's game. The angel investor comes in with a little bit of money, right? They're taking a risk. They're being a fool, but they hope there's another fool bigger than them. Does this sound familiar for real estate in San Juan del Sur? Maybe. Then you have the next round. They're the next bigger fool, but they're hoping that there's a bigger fool yet, and they're often right. Then the round B comes in. They hope there's a bigger fool. Then you get a round C. This is the big fool, right? The round C's come in, and they put in the really big money, like $1 billion. Of course, it depends on the product. So they put in $1 billion. They're really leveraged, but there's way more to show. There's hype. People know the product. The name is out there, right? You've heard about it. Builder.ai is a great example, right? They probably got to round C. We know they got $1.5 billion from Microsoft. That sounds like a round C or possibly later amount of money. But we also know now, and what Microsoft should have known then, is that Builder.ai never made the product that they were getting the investment money for. Had they been called on the carpet to produce something at that moment, we would have learned that they had never started making the product. They did nothing but do this facade to, yes, they had gathered users, they had a user list, but they had no tech behind it. They had no product behind it. The whole thing was fake. And so once it was divulged in their case that it was fake, it evaporated. And the company is just gone. So this is a great example where the greatest fools, Microsoft was the greatest fool. It got up to Microsoft's point, and then the rug got pulled out, and there was nothing. There was no value. They didn't turn around and say, well, at least we own all this tech. Maybe it's not popular, but we own it. We can use it in something else. They didn't have a real customer base. The customers were burned hardcore, right? They didn't have offices with a whole bunch of like useful stuff. They didn't even have physical servers that they could go be like, well, at least we can sell this on the metal scavenge. No, what am I saying? Salvage market. Wow. None of those things did they have. And in fact, not only did they lose $1.5 billion, not only do they have literally nothing to show for it, they now are carrying the badge of the current greatest fool in the market, right? This is a possibly record-setting, how dumb are you in venture capital, right? Normally, there's so much less investment with so much more behind it. And it's still a greatest fool game up till then. Typically, you don't go past round C. This is just, it's like, how many times can you fold a piece of paper? The number for most people is about the same, which is like, I don't know, 8, right? People are like, I can fold it more than, try it, right? Everyone peters out between the same place pretty much. So then, if you're in that greatest fool venture capital category, the round C, you have one further group of totally deep pocket morons that you can play for? The American public. And so once you're moving from round A to B to C, all this time you've been private. When you're moving into the public space, you need to switch how the company works. You have to switch all kinds of things. You're really revamping. And now instead of tricking a single investor who's trusted to know better, now you have to burn the trust of the American people themselves, which is surprisingly easy. And so the first time that you offer the company to be purchased publicly, we call it an initial public offering, or an IPO. And the idea of an IPO is that you are going to throw this out on the market and get enough money to cover the investment by double at least of the round C venture capitalist. At each step along the way, when the round A came in, it is expected that they will buy out the angel investor. The angel investor cashes out and walks away. They're like, I know this is BS, so I'm out of here. Thanks, guys. And then the round B guy buys out the round A. So normally those guys are bailing. Not always. Sometimes they're like, you know what? I really think this is going to go to IPO and we're going to do well, so we're going to stay in. Once in a while that happens. Once in a while, the greatest fool is the same company that was a lesser fool, right? Maybe the round B company is like, we've had a great round B. We feel great about this. We're going to jump in on round C ourselves. We are so confident in riding this to IPO, we're willing to do it. Once it hits IPO, then you're trusting on the public to have vetted all this stuff, and the public has generally no access to do this, right? Microsoft has unlimited access to walk in the offices of Builder and see if they actually had something before they put up that money, and didn't. Or they did, and whoever did it got paid off to lie about it. Who knows? But the American public does not have that right. So hiding stuff from them, super easy. But there are some SEC regulations that come at that point. So the one example that I had, they made it to round C. They raised tons and tons of money. They worked with Goldman Sachs to go to IPO. And my research and some others came to light. And the fact that all of the stuff that they were using to sell it was fake, which you're basically allowed to do to a VC, but it's a crime to do that to the public. And so they were unable to IPO. And that round C funder, in this case it was Goldman Sachs, got left holding the bag for far less than $1.5 billion, but tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, and then discovered to their chagrin that they had not done their research and had not applied just basic logic, right? It should have been able to look at it and see that the company they bought was fake. And it didn't have the user base, it didn't have the tech, it didn't have the products, nothing. It had a few things, but extremely little. And most of what it had dried up years before. And so they were riding on a fake product kind of base from 2 years prior. And so Goldman Sachs got left holding the bag and eventually had to sell it pennies on the dollar and got something for it, but never mitigated their losses. So they were the greatest fool in that case. Along this path, right, the product was never made, never existed. The whole thing became a mark of shame for everyone attached to it. It is not something that leveraged people into better jobs. None of the people who worked at the company made any money. The only people who made money were early investors who ran a con and were already rich. Every one of the people who founded the company were all already very, very wealthy with the connections to make this happen. They knew venture capitalists that would help them get going because of their family connections. And it was several of them together leveraging this, which is often the case, right? Several. And so I've worked at many, right? I've worked in Silicon Valley. Like I used to work in Silicon Valley. And this is the expectation. When people say venture capitalists, this is what they do. And so how do you make your money? If you are going to make money in a VC game, it's fine if you're someone like me and you're just taking jobs working for those companies, just negotiate a salary. And the problem is that you're not actually needed. Like the people are all fake. So, if I come in and I'm like, I'm a great software engineer, I'm a great IT person, I'm great, I understand the product domain, I can really help you build this product. They go, but we don't care if we build a product. That's not really relevant. In most cases, it's not of high value. So that's not a good leverage to get yourself a good job. once in a while, again, it can happen. Someone's like, we're going to actually make a product through this process because it's an easy afterthought, right? Just don't get in the way of the engineers. They'll produce something. So it's a common expected thread that this is how it's going to work. And the people who get in, they manage to come up with a lot of leverage and connections as their value. So in the case of the example of the one that I worked at in Silicon Valley, because the other one was Texas, it was some super rich kid, went to his parents, came up with a few $1 million, got a buddy who was poor but an engineer, and got him to do a whole bunch of work essentially for free. That guy eventually pulled a salary and did quite well, right? He was able to have a nice apartment. He was able to have a car. Like he didn't starve. The guy didn't like steal from him, but he didn't get paid as well as if he had gone to work at like a real software firm. But he had a lot more freedom, and he got to call himself a founder, and he got to have a cool office where he answered basically to no one. So that's cool. So often it's soft benefits, but the staff in general were paid at a third market rates because, and what those companies do is they say, we're going to give you stock options. And so if we manage to get all the way to IPO, you might be in a position, if the IPO goes well, to get some amount of money further down the path. But when you talk to people who go down this path, the chances that that actually happens is extremely low. The actual options are normally protected by law, but very rarely do the options become anything. And there's so many ways for things to fail. It never goes to IPO. It gets purchased by a private investor. It fails before it gets there. The IPO happens, but the value is really low, so your options are never worth anything, and so forth. So it's a highly risky thing. And if you're not coming in with deep pockets and big connections, chances are you're going to get steamrolled and you're not going to make any money. If you're rich, you're making your money by being rich. You're part of the elite who already has access to money. This is just another way to get it. Real businesses and real products don't talk about VC funding. It's not really a thing. There's exceptions, but it is extremely, extremely rare. I know as someone who does business in the US, right? Anytime someone's talking VC, we're all like, oh, right, like that's fine. If you think you can make money doing that, make money however you can, right? Scam investors, they're idiots, right? Shame on them for throwing money at stupid things and not doing any diligence. Even living here in Nicaragua, I know small private capital firms that have been screwed over in the same way, right? Rich kids were given many millions of dollars by their parents, and they went out and thought they could do private equity, bought some companies, realized that they had no capability or desire to run the businesses on their own, hired random people that they thought were smart that are just really greasy used car salesman, happens to be friends of my neighbor here in Nicaragua, which is crazy. And in both cases, just greasy people that are scamming everyone and causing problems wherever they go. Right? Ended up destroying the company and just paying him and his friends gobs of money and did a whole bunch of, used his position for this combination of embezzlement and money laundering. Right? That wasn't a VC firm so much, that was a private equity firm, a PE firm, but very similar. And so if you're the person who's the thief, you can do well. And if you're a PE firm that knows what they're doing, you can do well. But for people everywhere else, and if you're making real products, none of this makes sense for you. So that's the thing about VC. On the outside, this stuff sounds great. It's like, ooh, I've got an idea for a product. I wish I could pitch it to VCs and get all this money and do all this great stuff. No, you don't. That's because you've been sold a movie vision of random people show up, throw lots of money at you, you get rich and never have to pay the piper. But in the real world, the VCs who put up the money, one, they destroy your life. Everything you do is owned by them. Nothing's owned by you. Two, you answer to them all the time. You're just an employee. You might be a highly named employee. You might get a good salary. But generally, the people who are doing this, the reason you do it, it's a lot like priest in the old days, right? The smart son got to be a doctor, and then the dumb son they had to take care of, they sent off to the priesthood. We're talking like the Middle Ages, right? This was a thing. Well, that's where VC money is, right? The chances that you're going to make a lot of money, not that good. The chances that you could go work for someone where you have to produce something, nope, we know he's not good enough for that. But he's kind of personable and he's totally willing to lick boots of these rich investors. So we're going to send this person to do this VC work. And if they're halfway good at all they have to do is play the game and it's going to be a salary, a good salary, right? Because they're licking those boots. And so that's a real thing, but you're getting paid for being rich almost always. You're not being paid for making a product. And so the way that it's shown in movies is broadly fake. As someone who makes software products, right? It's always tempting to fall for this. Well, I know people who are VCs. I could call favors, and I couldn't call favor and just get VC money, but I can pull favors and get a VC interview, right? I can sit down with VCs and pitch ideas. That I can pull off. But in 36 years of doing this, just about 37, never once have I actually pulled that trigger. Right. Now, in the early days, I didn't have those connections, but for a long time I have. I could pull those triggers. I could pull those strings and go get those interviews. But one thing we always say is we don't want VC money. It's a what do we call it? A poison apple, right? Once you've taken VC money, the business you wanted to build is gone. You don't get to build that business. Maybe somehow it ends up making products. There are these rare exceptions, and that's one of the things that makes this difficult, is that you go out and you say, but where do you think Twitter came from, right? Twitter was, maybe it's not anymore, but it was a great product and it was a market leader and all this stuff. Yes, there are exceptions where someone had a brilliant idea, someone actually made a product, and eventually something good came out of it. But generally, the thing that's good that came out of it isn't from that venture capital time period. It's after it IPO'd, it didn't get bought out by some other company, which is often what happens, right? Often it's just someone sweeps in, buys the shares, shuts the thing down, and harvests the cash stores. But but once it gets to that point and they get real oversight, some companies that were IPOs actually are like, well, now, kind of by law, we have to start building this product because we have money from the investors and we have staff that are here to do it. And there's no greater fool. We're past the end of the greater fool game. So our investors who are controlling and pulling the strings, right, are no longer there to say, hey, trick the next people. Now it's just the public going, where's the company that we paid for? And so they try to start producing something. And 1 out of 1,000 times they do. And because they have all this money behind them, public investment funds, then they often are able to make something simply because of the magic of scale. And so it can happen. And Twitter is a great example of that. It could happen. In other cases where it does happen, generally the product exists beforehand. If you have a product that completely works and you're willing to give up control of it, which is a big move, and you think upfront payment is worth giving up long-term success and control, then there are cases where you can go to VCs and they're like, whoa, not only do you actually have a working product and like this is a full thing. Sometimes you can leverage that, but you're taking something that you've built and potentially throwing it away. So for example, if I was to make a company that does, I don't know, an app that teaches you how to exactly pour the perfect cup of coffee every time, right? So I get this app. Obviously, that would be worth a fortune. I totally make the app. I get it work. Everything works. And I have products like this, right? I own products that are done and work and you could deploy, and billion-dollar companies could be rolling them out. And billion-dollar companies we have billion-dollar companies. Since I was 22, I have owned products that multi-billion-dollar companies couldn't recreate. I have always been in this position. And without going to VCs, I have had the buyout offers from companies like IBM where they wanted my product to either go away or to replace theirs, but they wanted it to be their own product. But doing that means taking something you've created, which is very difficult for an engineer, and taking a one-time check and saying, this isn't mine anymore. And some people do that, right? And some people, it's enough money that they're like, you know what, I'm happy with this. But but it's so disheartening. And the money that's made, the big money, isn't yours, right? And now Diego, you're repeating exactly the thing I'm warning about. That's the VC game, I believe. 1 out of 10,000 work, right? So, in earlier you said I'd love to get into Y Combinator, harder to get into than Harvard, but that's the dream. But why is it the dream? Like, that's a weird dream, right? Because if you got into Y Combinator, which is super hard, and a bad thing, like I don't even want Y Combinator, nor do I want into Harvard, right? Just because it's hard to get into doesn't make it desirable. It just makes it's a greatest fool's game, right? Facebook is the perfect example of what I mean. Facebook already had the money. Then, using family connections, not real venture capital stuff, not business stuff, got more money and was able to buy a market, right? But none of it was getting into Y Combinator. None of it was being able to grow the market organically. None of it was. This was someone who already had tons of money, was basically guaranteed to be successful if they tried to do something, had access to the money, the investors, and all that. And as favors, this was done, right? So this is not a repeatable thing. So it's not I wish I could be Facebook, right? It's I wish I was born rich and didn't have to go through the struggles of business. And that's really the key thing, right? And so it's the idea that they push in the media is that venture capital is the factor that made this work and that made the money, but it is not. He could have easily done Facebook without venture capital, right? Because he already had loads of money, already had a product. I also think, I am not an expert, but I believe if you look, Facebook didn't have venture capital, right? Didn't have venture capital. The big successes rarely have VCs. IBM was not built with VC money. Microsoft was not built with VC money. Twitter, I think, was. Facebook was not, right? We are led to believe that there's these big successes being built with VC money, and there are examples, but they're not the giant ones, and they're not the ones you think, right? Because the secret to really being wildly successful is, of course, being born rich, right? Always the starting answer. How did Bill Gates become rich? He started rich. How did Larry Ellison get rich? He started rich. How did Mark Zuckerberg get rich? He started rich, right? Those are the things that made them rich. They may not have been billionaires, but they had very deep pockets that allowed them to start businesses without having to worry, and they didn't you just said, Diego says, I could do so much with that $500,000 check. Venture capitalists don't work in $500,000. $500,000 is someone you know is rich and is doing you a favor. VCs are in millions, often tens of millions of dollars, right? Tons and tons and tons and tons. However, so you think you could do so much with a $500,000 check, but you owe $1 million and you give up your company for that check. It's not just giving you money. It's not free money. It is money that you have to pay back at massive interest and at the expense of giving up control of your business. Right? And so that's a really important thing to understand, that going to America and getting venture capital money, one, isn't realistic, but that's pretty much known, but that it doesn't generally create the value you think that it will. And he mentioned Stripe. Stripe is an example where it mostly paid off where there's a lot of Stripe companies got involved, and they decided not to go to IPO, or at least bought it back. I'm not sure. But those examples are dangerous because it makes it seem like these are repeatable processes rather than a combination of a lot of factors and flukes, right? So coming up with anecdotes is the example of how bad it is, right? If it was a good thing, we would just be like, yeah, that's how you make money. Not here's one or two examples of companies that did this and were successful, right? If you go to Silicon Valley, there are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of these companies. You go to Austin, Texas, thousands and thousands and thousands of these companies. You go to Philadelphia, thousands and thousands. New York City, tens of thousands, right? There's so many of these VC-backed companies, and you're able to name two, right? Named three and one wasn't that, right? And in those cases, right, it's so tempting to think that it's the VC money that made it work. But the reality is that it worked despite the VC money. So that's an important way to look at it, right? And it's also important for, in a lot of cases, like $500,000 for a Y Combinator. $500,000 does not hire you a competent CEO. $500,000 does not hire you a senior software engineer in the US. Right? Those are big things to give up, right? When you're in Nicaragua, it's easy to think about the kinds of money that they're giving out as like just intense amounts of money. But when you look at American businesses that they're doing this to, these are single person salaries, right? Remember that the poverty line in the US now is $136,000 a year for a family of four. So if you are hiring 4 people who have families and are senior enough to be able to produce real things, you're talking about trying to get a startup off the ground with 1 year's runtime for 4 employees living at the poverty line. That's a scary thing, right? You could do the same thing here in Nicaragua for $20,000, right, and have 4 families of 4 living at the poverty line with a year's run rate to go. And so the perspective needs to be, oh, that's really not that much money, right? In an American context, it's because I live in Nicaragua and I see 500,000. I think, wow, that's a lot of money. But to all my friends and family in the U.S., right? To give you some perspective, Diego, my last salary offer was in 2013 was for working in the US was 1.2 million was my salary, which would be about 3 million today. That's one person's salary. That 500K, and then to pay that, you need another like 20% overhead minimum. So almost 500,000 would just be the US taxes on that money. And then if you need to have an office, right? An office, even in New Jersey, out in the country, even a tiny one, is going to cost you $100,000 a year for one person, right? I worked with a company that had Middle Eastern VC companies, and they did a startup in Phoenix, Arizona. And this is a great example. They got an angel investor from Qatar, put up $1 million for a software company. And they spent $1 million on apartments and office space and phone systems and desks and a secretary. And when they were done, they had never evaluated how to make the software, never hired any people who knew how to make software, never wrote a line of code. They never got to day one, and they burned $1 million and a year. Now, of course, if you're a smart person, 500,000 will go a long way, and you can do a lot with it. But you have to remember that this is very much a they expect generally when someone like Y Combinator is giving you 500,000, they're doing that. And this is a piece of how venture capitalists look at it. When you if I'm making a pitch deck for a venture capitalist, part of what I'm bringing to the table is a evaluation of my own company. I believe my company is worth $10 million today if you were to buy it outright. And we want another $1 million of angel money to help us grow it. And in exchange, you get 10% of the company, which, as you can see, is a good deal. You're giving us, we're going to go up to 11. We're giving you 10%. You should only get 9. You're benefiting for taking this additional risk. And so that's generally how that works, right? It's not, I'm a person, I have an idea, I'd like $500,000, and they take 10% of what you output. They expect you to have a business already worth $5 million, more or less. And then they give you extra money as a small vote in favor of what they think you're doing is good, with the assumption you're not going to be involved. You're selling out and getting out. You're playing the greatest fool game, and that's what is going on, right? And so taking that money has value. As someone who wants to make and run products that doesn't have value, that sounds horrible. Neither does it really make me anything, nor does it create a company that's good for me. Edwin says, hey, Scott, how's your point of view about in Esteli what happened last Saturday night? Navidad de Compras event that lasted only on Saturday from 7 to midnight. I have no idea what went on in Esteli, Edwin. We don't normally follow the Esteli markets too close. Yeah, it's so venture capital. If you feel VC is like this really good thing, there's some confusion, right? Can it be a component tool in building a certain type of business? Yes. Is getting VC money on its own a good thing? No, not on its own. Is getting VC money mean you have a good chance of being successful? Not at all. It means you have a very low chance of being successful. Taking VC money, does it make you more likely to succeed? No, I don't believe that's true. I think it makes you less likely to succeed, but if you do succeed, it might ratchet it up a little bit. It's high risk, low reward is the person getting it. Generally, you take VC money when you've got nothing. I've managed to put together this company that can't make things, and so I couldn't care less about it. It's a failed company, but as a customer list, or it developed. Let's say you were making photo editing software. Nobody wanted your photo editing software. You're no customers, but in the process of making it, you developed and patented some really good algorithm that, I don't know, cleans up noise in dark scenes, right? There's a lot of companies fighting to do that. Well, you may be able to go get venture capital money for that one specific thing and say, I'm happy to give up control of the company. I'm not that passionate about cleaning up dark space in pictures. I'd rather get $100,000 payoff and walk away. Cool. That's VC money is often a way to bail on your failed business ventures. And that's great that exists. And it's great that maybe they can monetize that into something. But that's a lot of what's going on, is those kinds of things. And as he said, I think it would be the hardest part is losing control over what you built. And no. Toyota says, hey, Scott, do you mess with cryptocurrency? I do not at all. I think it's exactly the wrong thing for me, because I don't enjoy speculative trading. My mother was a full-time trader. That's what she did. Like, it's cool. You know, she was really good at it, but she had time. She wasn't an engineer, so she didn't build products. And so for her, the financial advantages to doing that was very rewarding. For me, I'm an engineer. I like to build products. And so, yes, if you were like, hey, I can just make you a bunch of money. Obviously, I do enjoy money, right? But if I'm spending my time doing something and my choices are trade or invest, I want to invest. I want to make things, right? So I don't enjoy cryptocurrency from a mechanical like activity perspective, simply because it's I don't enjoy any of that kind. I don't enjoy trading. When I was a kid, I thought I would like stock trading a whole bunch, and I worked obviously on Wall Street for the bulk of my career, and I just don't really find it that enjoyable. I enjoy the accoutrements of it, right? I enjoy the technology behind it and building the algorithms and supporting the systems and the high risk and like there's a bunch of things I like, but the actual doing it, no. And so for doing it for myself, I wouldn't find it enjoyable, except for the making money bit, right? So, but I can potentially, hopefully, make the same or more money with some other activity, and so it's not a big thing, and. I don't believe that the world will be cashless. As someone who works in banking, and the more we've seen cryptocurrency, I think that it has driven home that cash is not going away. That's the big lesson, I think, of cryptocurrency. It's absolutely shown, and the example is, the more you see a market that pushes cryptocurrency, the more you see how much that's really difficult. People don't like it. Banks don't like it. And the cost of doing it is tough. There's neat technology behind it, but there's a reason why basically no market is moving towards trying to use it as cash. It has moved completely. The only places that tried it that way abandoned it at epic failures. Now they made huge mistakes too, so it's not cryptocurrency's fault in all those cases, but it's the movement behind it has it's hit its zenith and is really, really on the trailing edge. There was a time where we thought it was going to be a cash replacement, right? We had this, or a major component of cash usage, and we saw this usage ramping up, and now we're seeing this just tanked completely as non-crypto, digital, and regular cash ramp up again. Because they simply work better with lower overhead. And the more we see major losses in crypto, like we just saw a pretty big loss from one of the crypto banks or whatever, right? Even they lost their money, lost control of it. And as quantum computing makes the security of it moot, and now that we know how visible it is, crypto lost basically all of its luster. So you'll never find people using it in any meaningful way. Someday I think if the big governments allow it, you'll start to see it in small usage. But we went through the era where we tested it, and it just didn't make it. El Salvador being the prime example, right? Right next door, they went as much all in on crypto as anyone could, and it was a disaster, right? And to the point where anyone who talks about El Salvador jumps in and starts talking about like totally unrelated things, right? Wealth stores and stuff, rather than they're trying to distract people from the fact that using it as cash, which is unrelated, failed. And then, of course, right now, using it as a wealth store also failed. Using cash as a wealth store, we talk about this a lot. Cash as a wealth store, crazy. Cryptocurrency's potential value is as a cash, like Toyota is saying. It's just we're not finding places that are doing that, and partially it's because of common losses. Partially it's because of massive security problems. Part of it is because of complexity. And a big piece, and we say this here in Nicaragua a lot, I work throughout the region, right? I work in banking. I've worked in banking for 30 years. Finding a market where crypto fixes something is actually pretty hard. To Americans, it feels like there are these things to be solved and that crypto solves them. And that's because in America, there are very specific problems, and crypto often does solve them, right? So it's like to someone who has a whole bunch of nails, and you give them a hammer, they're like, this is amazing. Hammers fix nail problems, right? So to Americans who have nail problems, the crypto hammer really does seem like this panacea of solving all kinds of big things. But America is a unique market where it has many, many, many diverse banks in a single banking domain, and doesn't have government oversight of how the money moves. And so crypto really does, in the case of a good crypto with low technological overhead, low cost overhead, energy overhead, or whatever, can function really, really well in that case to fix really, really real world problems. Absolutely. So we see a really high percentage of Americans who perceive that these same problems or very similar ones exist throughout the world, and that they must not have other solutions, and that crypto will solve that. But when you go to other markets, I work in Belize, I work in Guatemala, I work in Nicaragua, I work in Bolivia, I work in Argentina, and in those markets, crypto isn't solving anything. And in many cases, it's not even available to be used because it's so far from solving anything, because then there's no nails. And so people are coming in with hammers and saying, okay, the hammer was this amazing tool. I know I'm going to be able to whack things. And then they're looking around and everything's like, I don't know, glued or something else. And they're like, I'm not sure what to hit, but I'm sure this hammer must be the answer. But the problem isn't the answer. The problem is no one knows what the question is, right? Because when Nicaragua being a great example, and Belize being even more extreme, Belize tried to go to digital, not crypto, just digital, and that failed. And they're now going way back to cash because digital was so bad. So now you have these people with hammers going, no, it must be the answer. But the thing you have to stick to is, okay, but tell me what question you're answering. And universally, when people look at this in Nicaragua or Belize or Guatemala, it's, oh, but don't you have a problem with, and they'll name some American thing. I'm like, no, we don't have that problem. That's not a challenge here. Often just because we're small, right? We're not saying that we're brilliant. We haven't solved something that Americans can't solve. We're solving something Americans don't need to solve, or we didn't have to solve it at all. It just never became a problem. Being tiny markets changes that a lot. And so in single giant markets, crypto has some natural advantages, at least given how the United States works. But in a market like Nicaragua, where we have direct access to bank transfers for everything already, we just don't have those advantages to the overhead. It doesn't come from here, right? The things that make crypto work really easily in the US, giant exchanges, lots of power, big data centers, lots of the tools being broadly available and so forth, just don't exist here. We don't have the data centers. We have excess power, but it is, different things. And so when you look at it that way, it's like, oh yeah, crypto is just easier in North America. So hammers are cheap and available everywhere. So that they were the tool to whack the nails, even more sensible. Here, we have to import hammers from somewhere else at great expense and teach people, okay, when you find this mythical nail, here's how you hammer it, right? And then people are like, why do I have this? So it's weird. Let me jump into losing control. Do I mess with crypto? Cashless? Want to start investing in stocks? Any advice? My advice is don't invest in stocks, honestly. So the thing about, and this is part of what today's topic is, right? So there's two pieces I really wanted to talk about. The first was what venture capitalists were. And the second is about blind investing and the US stock market. So I want you to think about what we talked about with venture capitalists, right? We're playing this greatest fool game. Once you get to this greatest fool game, now you have this initial public offering. Once you IPO, or initial public offering, you're now a publicly traded company, or you have stocks on a stock market. This could be a dinky little market that no one's ever heard of, but normally we're referring to the New York Stock Exchange, the NASDAQ, or one other that's in New York City, or in some cases the Chicago Mercantile. Once in a while, the Houston Commodities Exchange, right? But those don't generally trade stocks, but they actually can, especially Chicago. But there's three big markets in New York City, and those represent the bulk of how they trade these companies. And so you get your company's what it's called listed. So you take this publicly traded company and you get one of these markets to officially list you and manage the movement of your shares. If you're not on an exchange, you can technically be a stock that can be traded, but practically you're not. No one knows what your value is. It's very hard to do. It's a death knell to most companies to fall off of the exchange. So the thing about them is, think about what we did to get to this point. We played this greatest fool game, and now we're sticking the public with a company that the venture capitalists didn't want. If the VCs believed in the companies, they wouldn't want to go to IPO. They would stop somewhere along the way and go, whoa, I only put in $100 million. This place is worth a gold mine because we have a real product. Stop the presses. We're not telling anybody about this company. We are not letting anyone else invest. We'll probably put in more of our own money because this is the winner, right? You only go to IPO if you are good enough to get there and not good enough to stay private. Everyone wants companies to stay private. The big money is in private, always. So when you're private, you have tons less overhead, and it is very, very secretive. It's so much easier to do things, and it's so much more fun. And anyone who can make real money stays private. So that's where the big money is. People who are getting the 20%, the 30%, the 40%, the 100% returns are private. If you go public, what happens is the market will rebalance. People will pay more and more for higher returns until you're basically paying the same for the same returns. Arbitrage is where people try to make profit by trading stocks around when people, mistakenly think it's not worth as much, and then they sell it for more or whatever. So there's this natural evening of the stock market. So there's this general idea, and that's why we use index funds, is that things like the S&P 500 index will give you the most reliable return by leveraging it across the market. And that year over year averages out to about 9%. 9% is the baseline that we use. Now, you can very, very carefully pick just the right stocks and beat that index fund, in theory. But very few mutual fund managers are actually able to do that. That is not normal. That is an extreme skill, and you have to be extremely lucky. And so investing in stocks in North America doesn't have the advantage that you think it does. It puts you into this pool of giving money blindly to people who are not working on your behalf. Mostly they steal the money in businesses that weren't good enough to be kept private. So it's not the worst thing. In the United States, and this is where people who are not American need to think of it like an American. Americans use these things as places to park money so that we're not losing money when we're not building businesses or investing in really smart things, right? We don't do public trading because we think it's a good idea to invest in those companies. We do it because we're avoiding doing nothing. Idle money is the worst thing. So because you can get 9% return, you're in better shape. If you are in other markets outside the United States, you generally don't have big public markets like this. Nicaragua does have one, but they trade 5 stocks. That's it, right? So it's a very, very different thing, and people don't talk about it because it's 5 stocks, and who cares, right? So what you have here is, in most countries in the world, people do normal investing, where you invest in an actual business, where you actually are an owner. You are an owner with stocks, but they 1/1000th thing. And so the idea that someone who has good access to the strongest economy in the Western Hemisphere, and the ability to invest directly in businesses that have the potential to return 20 or 30%, would work really hard to put their money into a country where rule of law doesn't exist and your money's at great risk, especially as a foreigner. As an American, I wouldn't be too worried. But as a foreigner, especially from a country like Nicaragua, I would not trust my money in the United States. Absolutely not, right? Even as an American, I'm pulling my money out of the United States. I don't think they're going to seize it. I think the market's going to collapse and be really bad for a lot of my lifetime, and I want to avoid that. But as a Nicaraguan, you would be at intense risk of seizure of that money. The United States loves to seize things. That's why they blame Nicaragua for that all the time. Like everything, whatever the U.S. says Nicaragua does, chances are it's what the U.S. does. You want to be really, really, really careful that you don't have your money in a spot where they're going to be grabbing money from you just because you're Nicaraguan and have money in the U.S. I don't expect that to happen, but the risks are there and very palpable, right, in the short term. But even if you do all that and nothing goes wrong, you're looking at some overhead, U.S. taxes, and 9% returns is about the best you're going to reasonably get. And you generally only get that if you put in a lot of money and have access to the right places. And so it's generally a bad idea. You have access to better things, leverage them. The thing that makes Americans financially powerful is two things. One, everybody's investing. And because everybody invests, it makes it easier for everyone. And that's one thing that countries like Norway or Nicaragua could learn from. If everybody who had spare money was investing, it would create more economy, give more money for more investment, more things, and it would get the economic ball rolling more. Keeping money working is important, but it also makes it difficult for the poor to break into the middle class. It's not 100% good, but with the right regulations and good taxes, you can fix those things. The other thing is that Americans hold all of their money in investments all the time. Now, this is similar to the first one, but the one is you need all your neighbors to do it. The other is you need to keep your money always invested. As an American, every spare penny that I ever have never goes idle. I never have money sitting in a bank. The money is always in a business, always. If I don't have a plan to put it in a business I own, then it goes into the stock market. But the moment that I have a business to put it into, it goes into that, right? And in theory, my businesses provide a greater return than 9%, which gives me two advantages. One, more than 9% return. Pretty straightforward. Two, the flexibility to use the business for any number of things, such as I get tax advantages for working for my own company. I can use losses as a tax deferment if I need to. I have the ability to use the company for fun. Like for example, if I own a restaurant, I can go eat at that restaurant, right? There are advantages that you get from owning a business. I was talking with one of my staff about this, just the joy of having your own office that you walk around and say, this is mine. This is like a second home. Like I own a home. I also own this office. That's a nice thing if it doesn't cost you anything. When you're investing in yourself, often it doesn't cost anything. Often you are paid to have those things. Getting paid to own things just feels great, right? So Americans tend to keep our money working. It's always in motion. And most cultures don't do that and let their money simply erode. And that is where, at an individual level or as a cultural level, we can make large strides to make a difference. You don't need access to the relatively low return of the U.S. stock market to do so. But because the U.S. is at imminent collapse, we're at the top of the biggest bubble in history, and because we are at a moment where seizures, especially of Nicaraguan assets abroad, is a very real risk, I implore you to think very, very carefully about wanting to do something like this. Diego says, I just got a job in a company funded by VC. Realistically, I don't expect them to last more than 2 years, but the problem is pretty interesting, and they are helping get into the U.S. market. Ronamate says, is it possible for Nicaraguans to invest in the American stock market? Absolutely. Anyone can invest in the U.S. The U.S. loves taking people's money. They are not going to turn cash away. I don't know if you've ever met an American, but we don't turn down money. Diego says, in a previous stream, a guy told me to use interactive brokers. We did, and someone mentioned as well, anyone can form a company in the United States, go open up an LLC in Wyoming and use that as a trading entity. Lots of options. Edwin says, Ron 8, as far as the Nicaraguan entrepreneur is a U.S. citizen can invest in the American market. I don't know what that means. Ice Cube says, I've been investing with Forex for years. It's been 60-40 reward. Forex was my specialty. Runs from Nicaragua. I recently tried to help someone to open trading accounts in Vanguard, Fidelity, and Robinhood. Struck out. They specifically prohibit non-U.S. citizens from opening accounts. Those are purely just individual banks. You have that problem. We have U.S. banks that are constantly turning down U.S. citizens from opening just bank accounts because they don't like the address that they have. The U.S. banking market is nuts. Oh, Diego mentioned it. And yeah, you can just open an LLC and trade from that. Trading from your personal ID from abroad, generally very hard to do just because businesses do not want to put up with you. And American businesses are allowed to be racist. Okay? This is a sad state of things, but tons of businesses. All it takes is one person somewhere in the management chain who personally has a vendetta against Nicaragua in this example, and they will put in an order to block Nicaraguan accounts. Often the people at the top, and especially the investors in the company, this information is hidden from them. I've worked for tons of companies who do stuff like this, and it turns out some middle manager had a personal vendetta or just personal racism and decided to block some group of people. And because those people are blocked from business, the business never finds out, right? So chances are that Vanguard, Fidelity, and Robinhood, their investors probably did not get a call from you or the Nicaraguans who were unable to invest and told, hey, did you know that you're investing in a place that's intentionally turning down money? That feels like they're stealing from you. Right? Because being racist is stealing from someone. It's stealing from your investors. As an investor, if I find out someone is doing that for me, that's straight up theft. I'm putting my money into that business with the trust that the people who work there are going to try to make me money. They might fail, right? Oh, we tried to design a good marketing campaign and it turned out it didn't really work. People weren't engaged. That's an accident, right? Or that's not doing as well as the same marketing people in another company. But intentionally turning down customers because you have a personal desire to see them lose out. Well, you're taking my money and throwing it away to further a personal and an evil personal goal. That's theft. That is what business theft looks like. That's embezzlement. It's just not taking cash home. It's using the cash to buy the thing you want and taking that home, which in this case is just harming other people. So it's, in many cases, it's actually illegal, right? Vanguard, Fidelity, Robinhood, they're all publicly traded companies. They have fiduciary responsibility. The turning down accounts could put them in danger, but who's the people who are going to sue them? Part of the problem in the United States is that because most investing is done institutionally, meaning I put my money into an index fund, or I put it into a mutual fund, or I put it into a hedge, and those things then buy other stocks. I'm giving up my oversight of the underlying stocks and saying, well, my mutual fund manager is going to be in charge of overseeing the fiduciary responsibility at those companies. So I'm trusting a third party to go and watch out for these things. And they have very limited visibility and probably don't care particularly. Well, we didn't lose enough money. I don't know. I'm rich, right? My $1 billion making fund manager isn't going to be like, well, we lost $10,000 by not working with Nicaraguans, so I'm going to make a big stink. No, it wastes too much of his time, so he's not going to do that. But I'm being robbed, right? All the same. Individual says, I met some people who went to Nicaragua for gold. That's what you want. That is most definitely not what they want, unless you're Nicaraguan. I think we can have an account with Interactive Brokers. Yeah, you just got to find the right broker. Ice Cube says, gold is crazy in Nicaragua. My tios have land full of gold, but we keep quiet because of the government and Chinese. Everyone's selling gold here. Do we have a public market? Well, I didn't know we had one. Yeah, it's in Invercasa. That's why it's called Invercasa. That means stock market. Edwin says, Scott, you think of the result of the FTA with China, Managua City can be expanded so further that it absorbs Tipitapa, becomes part of the city, becoming an independent town to neighbor. I think Tipitapa is already absorbed into the city, so I think so. I can only imagine. Right? Invest in China. You can invest in China. That's an open market. You can also invest in England, Germany, Japan, a lot of those places. Would I? I don't know. But before the US, probably. And it says Ice Cube, and with Chinese having so many mining concessions, they are going after a piece of gold they can find, especially north of Nicaragua. And Digital says, really? Not sure what that was to, though. Ron Manate, bingo, it looks like IBKR allows Nicaraguans to open US trading accounts. There we go. Ice Cube says, blessings to God, been taking our gold for years. If you have access to the gold, keep it low. I think he's talking to the Nicaraguans, not the Americans. What do I think of Stripe, Atlas, or Dula? I have no idea what that is. Oh, these are incorporation services. As an American, I would never use these. No, I'm not saying they're bad. I'm just saying that as an American, there's no reason for me to use these. And so I don't have any. These are tiny little. Ooh, okay. Dula AI business in a box. Run away. You do not trust a company formation to AI. If you do that and anything's wrong, you're liable. 100%. You've got nothing you can do. You could end up in jail for something it does. They're advertising that they're not liable, and you are. So, I don't know what the hell's going on there, but that's some sketchy shit. Woo. For those of us in the U.S., we can just walk into an incorporation office and just be like, here you go. It's like a county office. It's like so easy. Stripe is generally a good company. So Stripe Atlas seems to do. It's not completely clear what it does. Click here, start your company, incorporate in the US from anywhere in the world. Nice. Join more than 100,000 followers, use Atlas. Charge your customers for free, get 2,500 in Stripe product credits for your first year. Get everything you need to run your business. Okay. See, so Stripe Atlas, I would look into. Dula, I would run away. Not anti-AI. I use it all the time for business. I think it's really stupid in a lot of ways, and people really need to know what it is that they're working with, but AI has lots of places. Filing legal paperwork is never one of them, right? That will that is just wow. So my advice is for Nicaraguans who are looking at just investing, remember you have the stronger economy. Right. When you're looking at investing in stock markets, you're talking about investing in the economy broadly. Now, if you're picking an individual company, I'm going to invest in Apple, right? So a couple things. One, if you're outside the United States, chances are that you do not have the culture to understand exactly how the stock market is working. Only 0.1% of Americans understand stock markets as it is. So it's less than that outside the US, where you don't have those stock markets and you don't grow up with it as part of just everyday life. Because all of us grew up with it. It's in the newspaper. It was everywhere, right? We see it on buildings as we go by, right? Stock tickers going by. We understand exactly what a share of a company is. We know exactly how it's regulated by the SEC. We know exactly what rights we have and don't, depending on how we buy it. We know exactly, what the returns are like and why how the valuation matches to those things. If those things aren't absolutely organic to you, you never had to research them. You never had to ask someone. I wouldn't do that investing, because that's what you're up against. You're betting that you can do that better than the people who did it every day. Imagine, coming to Ireland and saying, I'm going to build a robot and have that robot make naka tamales in Nicaragua. And I bet me remote controlling the robot, I'm not talking about like an AI robot, I'm talking about like an RC robot with just arms that you control from really far away. I bet I can beat the quality of naka tamales in Nicaragua. That's insane. No, you can't. Even if you were standing here, you couldn't do it. Even if you dedicated your life to making nactamales, you are not going to outperform all the abuelas who've been doing it since they were born and learned it from their abuelas who did it since they were born, who learned it from their abuelas. And they have tuned and honed and know exactly what to make. You will not compete, right? That's what you're up against investing in the US market. The average American investor is so tuned in to what they're doing and is still so bad, but is so tuned in that that's what you're up against as a percentage. And it's a bad game to play. But you have access to the stronger Nicaraguan economy. You have more growth, more opportunity, and a type of market where it's actually relatively easy for a Nicaraguan to get in. As an American, it's relatively hard. You can still do it, but it's relatively hard. But getting into Nicaraguan investing isn't so bad. And to give a direct, what do I mean example. Okay, so let's say you have a reasonable amount of money. Let's say 20,000 US dollars. And you think, I'm going to put this into the US market. Okay, reasonable. You're going to put it into an index fund. You don't know how everything works, so you're going to play it safe the way that most investors do anyway. And you're going to basically, as long as the US market doesn't pop the bubble, which it is expected to do, but as long as it doesn't, then in 10 years, you expect that money to double. That's what 9% per year does, right? Roughly doubles every decade. Just works out that it's really easy math. Or you could take that money, do a bunch of research, hunt down some, more footwork for sure. You find some Nicaraguans who have a really good idea, or you do this on your own, right? Maybe you're Diego and he decides 15,000, I can do this without you. I don't need any of you, right? Fine. Or maybe Edwin says, well, I've got some ideas, I've got some money, but I'm going to find some buddies and we're going to all get together and pool our resources. And there'll be 3 of us, and then we all have different skills, and we're going to get up to $45,000. Or maybe you all have 5,000, you just put it in because and only one of you is going to work there or whatever. And then you say, what do we know how to do? Make the business decisions that any business needs to make. And let's say you figure out that you can manufacture, name the thing. Right, and food products are really big. So maybe you figure out how to make soy sauce in Nicaragua because we have fish and soy and like all the things you might need for you're going to manufacture something that uses those ingredients. Great, into a processed food. Maybe it goes in a bag. Maybe it's a snack, right? Maybe it's soy flavored chips. I don't know. Sushi chips, right? You're free to use that. You don't have to credit me. Okay, so you go out and make sushi chips. And before someone says that I'm crazy, prawn chips are super popular in England. So crazier things have happened. So leveraging the food items available and the knowledge available in Nicaragua, you start making sushi chips. And you put together a sushi chip factory and you start selling these sushi chips. Maybe you sell them in Nicaragua, but you figure out how to package them into the cargo ships and you start sending them to China. The hope is that you will more than double your investment in the next 10 years. You may also, along the way, create jobs for Nicaraguans. Someone's got to package up those chips. Someone's got to fry the chips. Someone's got to do the accounting. Someone's got to load them onto the truck and so forth. Assuming you are never going to work there, none of your friends, you still have a really good chance that you are going to be able to beat that 9% growth in the United States. Maybe not wildly. Maybe you get 10%, maybe you get 11%. But it's there, right? And so you're going to double maybe in 9 years, maybe in 8 years, maybe in 1 year, right? You have this potential for much more explosive growth. That's the first piece. The second piece is if you are a investor in the United States and you say, wow, I put $15,000 into this stock. Well, I can't go use that in any way. If I invested in a hotel, I can't go stay in that hotel. If I invested in a restaurant, I can't go eat at that restaurant. Or I can, but I've got to pay full price. I can go invest in Hilton hotels. I could put $100 million into Hilton hotels. And when I show up to the Hilton in Princess in downtown Nicaragua, I've got to whip out my American Express and pay the same as any other gold member. Yeah, I'll have gold membership, but I have gold membership now. right? So I'll pay the same as anyone else. It won't give me that advantage. I can walk around and go, every customer that's here is making me money, except for me, of course. I'm taking away a room. I shouldn't have done that. But that's it, right? That's the only feeling you'll get. But if you put that money into your own chip business, one, you get to go hang out in the chip factory if you want. It's yours. Two, if it does anything cool, that's your win. When someone says, what do you do? You're like, look at this factory. I own this factory. Look at all these jobs. I create these jobs. That's really cool, right? When you're at the bar and people are like, pillar of the community, 8 people have jobs because that guy came up with sushi chips. Really, it was me, but you can take the credit. I don't mind. And then the big kicker. You figure out there's something in that company you can do and do well. Okay. So maybe you become the accountant. Maybe that's where you're good. Maybe you become the IT guy. Maybe that's where you're good. Maybe you become the person who just does security. Maybe you're not brilliant, but you're a great security guard. Well, why not work for yourself as a security guard? You trust yourself not to be stealing things. You trust yourself to make decisions about security because it's your company. Now you can get paid a reasonable but safe and secure, so you see what I did there, salary working for yourself, which is less stressful than working for someone else doing the same job. And you have the benefit of, I'm going to keep my eye open for everything. Wait, I'm just security, but I own the company. So I noticed that they have 3 people filling those chip bags, but you could definitely do it with 2 if you made this little change. Right? How many companies get so much more efficient because someone who's acting like an owner, that's an American term that we use for that, in this case you are an owner, just puts in a little bit of effort and says, let's apply some common sense and fix some dumb stuff, right? And suddenly, boom, we're able to really make some money. So investing in your own business can really do an awful lot. Edwin says, I saw on Facebook forums that in San Juan del Sur, we may have a building that can be taller than the Benjamin Zeledon building in Managua. A new hotel will be going to plan to build and be 19 stories. That feels crazy. I mean, it's not a terrible idea, but they're not filling the hotels that are there now, partially because there's not a single good hotel there now. So I'm all in. That could be a sensible thing. But it also feels a little bit crazy. But if you go to Panajachel in Guatemala, it's way bigger, but it's got kind of a similar vibe. They have some big buildings like that. You can see it possibly working. Also feels kind of like a bad idea. The Benjamin Zeledon building, old Bank of America building that survived completely the 72 earthquake, is currently Nicaragua's tallest building with 18 stories. That potentially new hotel in San Juan del Sur be 1 story taller. So funny that 18 is not really funny. It's really sad. Our tallest building is 18 stories. Where there needs to be one is Matagalpa. Matagalpa needs like a 35 story, like just own it. Put in a huge tower downtown and blah. Ice Cube says you're 100% right. My family is huge, and I'm the only one who understands the markets. My family has no clue. Edwin says, we'll beat it on being Nicaraguan, tall and skyscraper, and I refuse to believe in it, but that idea was wild for me, to be honest. Hard to imagine San Juan del Sur doing that, but I can. If you needed me to make a case for it, I could kind of pull it off. It feels like a wild investment. How do we have a stronger economy? It really doesn't feel like it. So a really important thing, Diego, in the U.S. depends on this, is that strength of economy is very hard to feel. But going back and forth between Nicaragua and the United States, no, it definitely feels like Nicaragua has the stronger economy. Partially, though, it's that economic strength is not something that people really read into a market very well. And so what people tend to see is legacy investment or size. So the United States is huge, right? Physically huge. And so when you look at everything, you're like, these things are big, everything's expensive, lots of stuff is going on. But mostly that's because the population is massive and the amount of stuff flowing through it is huge. And so it's very misleading to look at it and say, well, it's doing well, right? But if you were to put $1 into the US economy and see what it does on average, it does 9%. And if you did the same thing in Nicaragua, I don't know what that average is, but it's way higher than 9%, right? And that's the really important thing is, and when you're in the US, right, that's a contracting economy. When you're in the US, it feels like you're looking at the carcass of an empire. This is a place that did some really big things and can't do them anymore and is rotting away. And you like there's places that are doing okay, New York City, for example, but like Houston, my gosh, it takes no effort from just driving around. And you're just like, holy cow, it's all collapsing. And then you come and do the same thing in Nicaragua. And it's like, oh my gosh, instead of everything decaying, everything's being replaced and built. And there's all this movement and everything's new and new things are happening. It is absolutely huge, right? The amount of growth. And being here over 5 years, full time, and going back to the U.S. and seeing how much it has collapsed, and coming here and seeing how much it has advanced. The U.S. is the strugglingest large economy in the region. Obviously, Argentina has done really bad over the last 5 years, and so forth. And Nicaragua is the strongest over the last 5 years. So you're getting the most wildly divergent cases, but no, it certainly feels that way. If being in Nicaragua doesn't feel like you're in a boom economy, then I guarantee it's because you haven't been to the other economies, right? Costa Rica doesn't feel like this. Panama doesn't feel like this. Guatemala is not too bad. Mexico is doing great. U.S. feels terrible. Canada, I haven't been to in the recent time, but everyone all the Canadians I know are like, oh my gosh, it's so bad, right? Bolivia's collapsing. Argentina's collapsing, right? And Nicaragua is skyrocketing, right? Growing up in the U.S., I've never seen an economic boom like this, right? Which there have been booms like this in the United States in the past, but not during my lifetime. So getting to witness this here is really amazing. That there's so much money going back into the economy. There's so much, where the U.S. is stagnating on internet, Nicaragua's rocketing forward. Where the U.S. is stagnating on roads, Nicaragua's rocketing forward. Where just all that stuff. The reason that there's two main reasons that Nicaraguans are misled. One is they confuse the strength of the economy with the size of the economy. Nicaragua is a tiny economy. The United States is a massive economy. So that's an easy one to be like, big is better, but not in economic terms. Who cares, right? Honestly, no one cares. There's no person who benefits from the size of an economy. The United States is not a person, right? If the U.S. was a person, then it would have bragging rights over Nicaragua. Haha, I'm bigger than you. But the people from Americans, and the people from Nicaragua, Nicaraguense, individually aren't affected by the size of their country, right? Like, who cares how many of us there are? What matters is what we get individually. And the average Nicaraguan gets more than the average American, right? In growth by a long shot. And in many ways, in just everything, right? That is the thing that's staggering. That Nicaragua is outpacing the U.S. is easy. Nicaragua's doing great. U.S. is doing terrible over the last few years. So of course, individually we're doing really well. Size and all that stuff doesn't really matter at all. At all. It's not a factor. But what's truly epically amazing is that we're starting to be at a point where we take the actual static numbers and say, what can an average American do with their income? And what can the average Nicaraguan do with their income? And the average Nicaraguan easily, we're not saying there's two ways to hear easily in English, right? And I'm not trying to say that obviously the Nicaraguan's doing better. I'm saying that it is easy to imagine that if we could break down a real comparison of medians, that we would accept, as long as we didn't know which one we were picking, that the Nicaraguan is doing better. As soon as we know one is Nicaraguan, no matter how much better they're doing, we go, well, yeah, but, and we imagine there's something wrong that makes it not do work. But when you actually just break it down to points and say, what are the things we would measure, then the median Nicaraguans are definitely doing better than the median Brits. And it looks like are doing better than the median Americans. And also, surprisingly, is that the median Canadians have passed the median Americans, right? So, and that is generally considered the most important factor to be able to measure, right? There's no magic way to really measure it all. Median quality of life is the most important thing. And the big factor is that the median American and the median Nicaraguan have food, have shelter, have water, have reasonable safety, but only one of the two lives in fear of those four going away, and only one of the two also has healthcare. It becomes, under most ways of looking at it, not even close. The things that you have to evaluate for a median American to sound better than a median Nicaraguan get into really trivial things like, but the median American can have an extra car or greater variety of food or can buy more decorations for their house. Okay, absolutely. How do you compare those to food security, water security, housing security, transportation security, safety, healthcare? That's so unbelievably dramatic. What factors could you give that would create a rational argument for the US median doing better? I don't think you can. Maybe someone can, but I don't think you can. I think those factors are such slam dunks, and that they're all in Nicaragua's favor. It's not that some are and some aren't, and you're weighing which is more important. Well, the U.S. has nicer water, so that's better, but Nicaragua has nicer food, so that's better. Which is more important? Yes, the U.S. does have higher quality water on average. That is true. But Nicaragua has access to clean water at the median level, and so yes, the U.S. does have it better, but in a very non-meaningful way. Nicaragua has food better in a significant way, right? Non-GMO'd foods is unreal how important that is from a food perspective. Not as important as starvation, of course, but once you're past starvation, having food that is actually healthy, pretty darn important to every aspect of life. And that is one of the things that and Nicaraguans often don't understand, that Americans are quite literally escaping food deserts and monopoly health and food regimes where we don't have access to food we feel okay eating. And it's killing us. And it's not because we're lazy or poor. It's because we quite literally don't have the right to real food anymore. And trying to explain that to Nicaraguans, like, it's so ridiculous that that's something we're concerned about. And imagine a Nicaraguan having to learn that Americans live in produce deserts, right? What the hell's a produce desert? Nicaragua doesn't have one, right? So they've never had to consider living in part of Nicaragua where there was no produce. What? How could that be? Sure, there's a place that maybe can't get a fresh steak, but you don't need steak to live, but you do need fruits and veg. And Anyone says soy sauce is necessary for a Japanese tuna, salmon, and rice ball. That sounds excellent. I would like that. I mean, like right now, I would like one. Diego says, I think that one of the things that keeps the country down is that we don't really do partnerships. The Guaguense culture of wanting to scam the other really brings the country down. That is true. Americans do a lot of that, but it's not on the same scale. You are correct. In Digital does says, and you get to be part of the community. Too bad the profits are being stolen. Not sure what you mean there. Diego says, how are profits being stolen? He has the same question. Or maybe in Digital means in the U.S. That's a big thing. In Digital says, the Best Western across from the airport is nice. I don't agree. In Digital says, do you suppose the Nicaragua government is monitoring these chats seriously? Absolutely they are, and they have told us straight up that they are. They've never actually said that the chats are being monitored. The show is watched. Every episode is watched. If I say something that is incorrect, they will reach out to me. They have channels to check and correct. In 5 years, only ever happened once. I had a ton of people report that I put misinformation out. They called and said, take it off the air, and I did, and I called back and I said, I don't think you really want me to take it off the air because I am 100% sure that what I said is correct, and the people who reported me were lying to you to trick you into reinforcing because they were trying to scam people and they wanted me to take down the thing. And the government was like, hold on. And they went through word for word through the transcripts and they're like, oh shit, it was a fake takedown. And they called me and they're like, put it back. So we know that the system works. They called, they didn't complain about what we talked about. They complained that I had said something wrong. Like I said something that was factually wrong. And when I said it is not factually wrong, it is fact. Check it. It's your law. You check it. And they said, oh, yes, sorry. But it's a great system that, like, I actually appreciate that they're watching. I don't want in 10 years the government to come back and be like, oh my gosh, you've been saying all these things. This was all lies. You made this up, blah, blah, blah. No, I want them checking every episode. If they have a problem, call me that day or the next day. Let me know. We can put up a thing. Give me a resource of where to get the information or whatever. And we know that it's being looked at. But in 5 years, only one time have they said to take something down and then really only take it down while we check is what it turned into. We don't want people seeing it and getting misinformation. But it does take time to check. But yeah, they absolutely. So even when I was a much smaller channel in 2022, I had a very long conversation with Border Control and they let us know. They're like, yep, every episode. But they're like, it's not a problem. Just we're going to watch you, right? Great. So thank you to all the Nicaraguan monitors for the extra views. It helps promote the show. If to all the Nicaraguan government monitors, please, you too, give a thumbs up on the show. It helps promote the show and get the word out there. And hopefully they enjoy our live chats. But yes, no, absolutely they are reading the chat. Diego says, no, this chat is not big enough for telco core to care. It absolutely is. So just to give you guys some perspective, and this is not to toot my own horn, because lots of other channels are like this. It is for what we are. This is the largest media outlet in the country, right? For expats in English. We are the largest show by an expat. We are the largest show for expats, in English at least. When you consider that, realistically, there is no channel that they would want to monitor more. We're not selling real estate. So there's some decently large real estate channels, not as big as this one, but relatively big. And all they're doing is showing houses, right? They know that the prices are too high, whatever, but it's just a show showing houses. They know there's nothing to see on there other than catching them using their drones illegally, which they do all the time. But that's it, right? And I've been told those shows aren't big enough for them to track down the drones, but mine is. Like, I've been told straight up by the police. They're like, no, we totally understand. Everyone else is using drones and they're not getting caught. You're so much larger that you're definitely being watched. And so you can't try to squeeze by. And you know, if I use drone footage that someone else just sends me, I will get lots of messages. That's like, where did that come from, right? I'm like, swear to you, I do not have a drone. I did not take this footage. Check the dates. You can see I was somewhere else. But some of the shows are about food, and some of the shows are about coffee, and some of the shows are about tourism. My show is very, very different, and then we go into deep like we talk about the government all the time, right? Whether it's the healthcare, or how do you get a visa, or what you're allowed to do or not allowed to do, or how it works, or right, we're much more high priority or high concern of a topic base than, say, today we're going to teach you how to make right traditional bao. Okay, right? There's absolutely nothing. Like, okay, we know what they're cooking, unless the cooking is a cover for code words, right? There's nothing to see. But here, because of the volume, because of the number of people, we're the largest resource for the expat community in the country, right? I mean, I was in a barrio hospital today. I got recognized by 2 different people while I was there. I was out having coffee today. I was recognized by people while we were there, right? In one day, right? My daughter's like 3 times in one day, Dad. Like, without leaving the barrio. Right. It's something like the estimate is something like 25%. Yes, 25 expats. 25% of the expats in the country have used my stuff as a resource for coming to the country. So because the show actually moves the needle on population movement in the country, absolutely everything we're doing is watched by the government on a regular basis. And you can be 100% sure, without a shadow of a doubt, that every one of these episodes is also watched by the American government. Absolutely. There is no possibility. And I do know of people from the U.S. government who have watched this. I have had people from certain agencies interact and accidentally expose what agencies they were from, that we were being monitored by. They didn't give us any problems, right? Just to be clear. But we're in Nicaragua, right? This is one of the countries that the United States is least friendly with, and certainly the least friendly for its distance to the United States, with the obvious exception of Cuba. And so because of that as well, our visibility to the United States is extremely high, and that I actually have American agents who keep tabs on me. While that sounds crazy, when you think about that, I'm probably the highest profile American in the country in any particular way. Obviously, if you were to explain it in some other context and not say it was me, you'd be like, obviously there's some 3-letter agency following him around, obviously. And then you say, you know, that Scott who does the YouTube channel, you'd be like, what? When you put it without me thinking of it as a YouTube channel, of course there is, right? It's so little resources for the U.S. to throw into that of course they do, right? So it's not a, oh my gosh, they're targeting us or anything. It's just, in both cases, it is a super obvious thing that they would definitely do. John says, I'm here and have been, and the U.S. is getting weird. Diego says, Telcor is the telecommunication regulator, government's telecommunication regulator, blah, blah, blah. I mean, we are so down that there's nothing else to go then up. That's mostly true, Diego. I mean, that's certainly a big advantage of hitting the bottom, is that pulling out of the bottom of the trough is pretty easy in certain ways. But Nicaragua is doing so at an unbelievable pace, right? The median lifestyle here has passed, you know, because people talk about, you know, we get so much, if Nicaragua only did things like Costa Rica. There's a reason why Nicaragua's not doing things like Costa Rica. It doesn't want to be where Costa Rica is, just like it doesn't want to be where the U.S. is, where the median is worse than here. I think the median Costa Rican is worse than here, much closer, right? And again, we're not knocking Costa Rica. They're overall have a much larger economy, or much richer economy. And they're an even smaller country, so it's a more difficult mix. But in their median position, I don't think the median Costa Rican is in quite as good of housing a position. Better than Americans for sure, but as good as Nicaraguans, I'm not sure. We know that the healthcare in Costa Rica, one, they lost to us in the rankings for quality, but they're also not free, whereas we are. So that's a pretty solid win. Free and better versus really good but not free. That's a slam dunk. What little bit I know, our internet is better here. Any testing I've done, ours is more solid and cheaper, but theirs is good. Right? They don't have a lot of the like, oh, in the U.S. this particular thing is doing really bad. Costa Rica doesn't have that, but they do have this like everything's getting really expensive. So we don't see people in food deserts. We don't see people in water and food insecurities, but we're seeing maybe they're not getting quite as much of stuff. Thanks, Edwin. I don't know about that, but Nicaragua offered a much higher quality of life for me. Well, of course, if you're bringing in outside money, then that's an obvious one. But it's for the median income that you have to compare. Diego says, in terms of housing, one thing is that we are perfectly fine to live on multi-generational homes, but Americans usually don't, and often. So you are correct, Diego, but importantly, Americans often can't, and that's important to keep in mind. Keep hearing the dog do something. That Americans often don't have a choice about that because our work options don't allow us to do that in many cases. So it's not that Americans wouldn't want to. They've been conditioned not to want to due to lots of other factors. But over time, say a generation, if we fix those things or change those things, it's not to say that the American system is wrong in this case or that Nicaragua's is right, but Nicaragua's provides for a lot of advantages, partially because, again, smaller country, so some things it just doesn't have the same problems like we were talking about with some other things before. Americans might switch to multi-generational and are trying to now, but finding that the system doesn't allow them to. The houses that we own aren't set up for it. The cultural norms don't allow for it. Doing multi-generational housing is leading towards population collapse and other things that it doesn't affect in Nicaragua. Again, long time having adjusted to that culturally. Diego says, I believe that many of the advantages we have is that we live in multi-generational homes for longer or forever. Absolutely. Those are massive advantages. The U.S. thing of massive homes at huge cost that everyone has to buy. And if you don't, like, it impacts you in so many ways. But if you do, it impacts you in so, like, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. In the U.S., it's really, really crippling. And no one has an easy way to do it. Individual says, I was already on the list. I know the feeling. Diego says they have no way to know your real identity. No, they do. YouTube is not like WhatsApp. They absolutely can check your identity. They, the U.S. absolutely, no question. But Nicaragua probably can as well. Indigenous says that's a problem for Americans. Janet says all that recognition, you know what it's like to be Mancho. No one knows what it's like to be Mancho, Janet. At best, I'm mini Mancho. But it is not close. Dale was saying the other night, he's like, I didn't know who Mancho was, but then I saw this line of people just coming by to pay their respects, and I said, that's Mancho. Indigenous says, you don't go out in the countryside and jungle, huh? Is that a question for me? In what respect is the comment? I mean, I live in the countryside. Right, sort of. And suddenly everybody's quiet. We got a fair number of people on, good number of views for a Sunday night ad hoc impromptu live stream. While I'm waiting for you guys to respond. Oh, what am I drinking? I have Victoria Classica. Sorry, I showed it earlier on my first can. This is just the second can. It's the tall boys of the Classica. I generally drink Classica. I prefer Tonya Light, but it's hard to find. But I prefer Classica over Tonya for whatever reason. Janet says, well, it makes it interesting for me, at least. She means the super fame of her husband, Macho. Brian's here. Chirp, chirp. Diego says, living off the Nicaraguan economy is rough. It is. But you have to compare it to living off the American economy is rough. If you live in that country, the thing that is primarily different is that a Nicaraguan trying to live off the Nicaraguan economy, but in America, is impossible. And an American living off the American economy in Nicaragua is easy. But that's doing international arbitrage and is a different thing. If you're thinking of what does it take to live off the Nicaraguan economy in Nicaragua versus what does it take to live off the American economy in America, then that is where it appears pretty convincingly that living off the Nicaraguan economy is actually easier. I know it doesn't feel that way. And it's not that it's easy. It's that you're missing how hard it is for Americans to live off of their economy. There's this constant belief that Americans have it easy because they did not that long ago, right? I'm not saying that they didn't have that. And Nicaragua was worse not that long ago. So Nicaraguans have a certain amount of remembering how bad it's been and feeling like that still applies, and a ton of, well, America's always been so rich, that must still be there. And it's hard, it's even hard for the Americans to internalize how bad it's gotten in the US, but it has gotten so bad economically. Being able to afford food, being able to afford housing, being able to afford healthcare, right? Healthcare starting January 1st is going up so much. So many people can't get healthcare anymore. They used to just have outrageously expensive healthcare and having to limit it, but now they're moving to not having any, right? The starting January 1st, I think it's the median Nicaraguan is like 50% above the average American. Like it's really becoming dramatic shortly, but right now it feels like when you compare, Nicaragua is actually the easier one to live off of. Still hard, but you really have to think about Americans just get a bunch of things that don't really matter, and Nicaraguans get a few things that really matter. Indigenous says, I love being there for the holidays. It lasts months there. Edwin says, best city in the U.S. for winter, Christmas, New Year's Eve. It's got to be New York City, right? Help me out, guys. I mean, I've only spent Christmas in certain cities. The best thing in America for Christmas is to have a family country home that you don't have to leave and everyone comes to you, and like that's ideal. I grew up with that, right? Big farmhouse, everyone came to our place. That was amazing. But if I was going to do Christmas in a city, absolutely New York City. It's America's iconic Christmas city. Second, maybe Boston. Maybe Philly could be okay, but you got to be in that Northeast. You got to be in the snow belt. It's got to be loads of snow coming down. If it was me personally, Buffalo, of course. Diego says, the only reason I'm doing well, it's that most of my life I've been dependent of the U.S. economy. Well, that's true, but it's also misleading, right? That you have a dependency on foreign economies is just part of a global economic world. So it's important not to discount the fact that Nicaragua works internationally, because it's a tiny country. Of course it does. And so does Switzerland. You know, if you were to go to Switzerland or Norway, some of the richest countries in the world, and say, are you rich or poor here? They don't go, we're poor because we're dependent on the economies of Germany and England and France. No, they go, yeah, we're freaking rich because we globalize. We know what we're doing, right? So it's all small countries are dependent on the countries around them. It's how well they do compared to them that matters. Indigenous says the people really go over the top. I loved it. I'm thinking about going to Managua shortly with my kids and filming some of it. I really want to get some filming of the Christmas stuff there because I love Managua for Christmas. Diego says most of my childhood via remittances, now via all my jobs being from U.S. companies. But even Nicaraguans put their companies in the U.S., right? So it's, you can look at it as you're a Nicaraguan working for an American company. And I have Nicaraguans who work for American companies. But those American companies also say, oh, sure, we're doing okay, but we're dependent on Nicaraguan staff and Nicaraguan businesses to make it happen. So that goes both directions, right? It's just the U.S. is better for incorporating companies in many cases, and Nicaragua is better for having staff in many cases. And so you're just seeing that globalization. You're not seeing Nicaragua failing compared to the U.S. Now, remittances, yeah, that's different. People are not doing remittances from Nicaragua to the U.S., but most of those needs are caused by U.S. intervention to create those needs. And yes, at the end of the day, those are just underlying factors that lead to whatever the economy is today. So you can't look at them independently and be like, well, you know, you can separate it out. It doesn't work that way. But the need for remittances is caused by the U.S., not caused by Nicaragua. Edwin says Matagalpa have but also importantly, Diego, right? Nicaragua's only had a really strong economy for like the last 5 years. When I was here 10 years ago, completely different picture. And the U.S. was really strong back then. So when the U.S. was strong and Nicaragua was weak, you have certain expectations. So that's one of the things I'm saying is that Nicaraguans have built up this momentum, this inertia of feeling a certain way about their economy. And most Nicaraguans and most Americans have not really adjusted to realizing that Nicaragua has been on a really good trajectory for the last several years, and that the U.S. has been on a really terrible one for the last several years. And so they still use this old feeling of, well, you know, I just was in this situation where the U.S. was doing so much better. Really, what's just? Oh, well, it was 10 years ago. Okay, yes, that's a lifetime, right, in economics. Edwin says Matagalpa have the central building, Edificio Central, as the tallest one in the Perla del Centurion, which is 6 stories. The one next to is the former UCC building, where a Chinese store sits today. There's actually an apartment that we used in the Edificio Central. I watched that get built over the years because my offices were in Matagalpa for many years. Right? Remember, I've actually been here for 10 years. We looked really seriously in 2015 at putting offices into the Edificio Central. Diego says, and as a whole one of those things, I believe it's helping people a lot are call center jobs, at least in Managua, they made before and after. Yep, but those are Nicaragua jobs, right? Those are Nicaraguans going to work. That's part, you know, you can say the same thing, right? So if you're in the U.S. and you say, where's the money coming from? Well, I used to work on Wall Street. We were the outsourced call centers for London, right? But we didn't say, we're not really making money. The economy here is terrible on Wall Street because we work for London, right? It doesn't work that way. People work for, it's just the world's global. So you're kind of looking at Nicaragua as not being up to par because it acts like every other country. But every single country has these things, including the U.S., right? Because in the U.S., we say, well, but none of our stuff's made there. It's all coming in from China. All of our jobs are for some other country, right? But it's not. It's that every country works for each other, right? It's a bunch of... and the position you want to be in is the one that Nicaragua's in. You want it to be doing even more economically sound. But those jobs coming in from the outside where the real work is being done here and the people, other places are just shipping money in... that's the perfect one, right? It doesn't have to come from here. We're not consuming the country to create that value. We're sucking it out of other places. We have a trade imbalance in our favor. And it says, yes, that building was used as Universidad de Ciencias Científicas de Matagalpa in 2024. It became 365 Mall, a Chinese store in a 4-building story in Matagalpa downtown area. Oh, I know that building. Yeah, that's really close to Luke. John says, something I saw recently talked about the control of the people the Nicaragua government does. Any idea what the fuck they were talking about? No, you're American propaganda. This is so little of that here, right? Everyone talks about it, yet no one has an example of it. Um, Diego says, yeah, it depends on what they mean, but it's again, it's one of those things. The U.S. says it about Nicaragua because there's so much government control going on in the U.S. or fear of it coming down the pike that it feels reasonable to say it about Nicaragua. And because Americans are now conditioned to be afraid of that, real or not, in the U.S., it makes it really easy to make them fearful about it other places or to believe that other places would have those problems too. So just like yesterday, someone said that Bibles aren't allowed here. What? And cameras? That's crazy. And yet, because it implies that the U.S. is looking at banning Bibles and cameras, so things to watch out for. Edwin says, yeah, maybe a Matagalpa 16-story building wouldn't be bad at all, but considering its geographic location and Rio Grande and Matagalpa going through the city is rough. I don't know that the Rio Grande, like, I know the geography of Matagalpa pretty well. I think you can fit in a really tall river. That makes no sense. I think you can fit in a really tall building on the east side of the river pretty easily, and actually being right up against the Rio Grande could work pretty well. You don't worry about flooding with large buildings, so that's pretty easy. And Matagalpa really is dense and rocky, so you have a really solid foundation for building tall buildings. Maybe not 35 stories, but something pretty serious. I think is quite doable. And you have a very dense population. It's an urban area within the country where there could be a real benefit of a heavy population density. It's kind of like Pittsburgh. If for anyone who knows Pittsburgh, Matagalpa has some of that same vibe, and I absolutely love Pittsburgh. It's one of my favorite American cities. Edwin says, also for being vulnerable for flooding when rains is there. Right, that I didn't read that yet. That's one of the things you don't need to worry about in a tall building. Diego says, who said Bibles weren't allowed? The Catholic press. John says, not sure a tall building in the Ring of Fire is a great idea. Think about Tokyo, right? Like, obviously they do tall buildings, not a thing. I know, Diego. I actually said on the show last night, I'm like, this is straight up defamation of Catholics. A Catholic newspaper claiming that Catholics are liars and like absolutely wackadoodle. I said every Catholic should start a lawsuit against the whatever it is, the Independent Catholic Press or whatever it is. Straight up lies. Every single thing was a lie. Didn't have any of its reference information or anything. I didn't mean to skip it. Indigital said, how do you get data about Nicaraguan economy? Trustworthy. So all world sources have the same information, basically. You can look at anything on the Nicaraguan economy. We're not getting it from the country. Right. I guess I did see it for the first time. I did see an ad from the government talking about why the economy is so good and showing some of the spots where it's happening. And I was like, okay, those things make sense. Oh yeah, Guatemala has quite tall buildings as well. It's for us building in the mountains. There's no worry about the earthquakes in the mountains. They shake a little, but tall buildings with earthquakes is not a big concern. But all the like Statistica and World Stats and Numero and those kinds of things, they all show all the economic indicators stuff, and a lot of it comes from the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and those things. Who a lot of people agree with or don't agree with isn't really important. Their stats on economic growth are generally pretty accurate. But yeah, no, tall buildings in Leon, in Managua, those are a little bit riskier. But in like Matagalpa, I wouldn't be worried at all. Esteli, Hinotega. Japan has heavily engineered those buildings. That's true, but we heavily engineer them too, right? Since 1972, they're all heavily engineered here, which is why we take 7.9 in 2022, didn't lose a single building. Now, we don't have super tall buildings, but if we did, they would be engineered for earthquakes, of course. Honduras doesn't have very tall buildings, does it? But that's just because they're poor, not because of the Ring of Fire. Oh, have you guys seen the new... Is it Via Bethel in the eastern, in Cochuala, in El Salvador. It's been built in the last month, and it is really impressive. Wikipedia list of tallest buildings in Central America. Every single one on the top 23 list is Panama City. That's worthless. All right, tallest buildings in Honduras. Let's see. The Torre Sky Residence Club. I forgot about that. 28 floors. They've got the Torre Aqua is 17, and the Mirador Los Andes is 12. Crown Plaza San Pedro Sula 15. The Maya Hotel 13. Plaza San Martin 13. They've got a lot at 12 and 13. A lot. And then the Torre Aqua, which is right in Tegucigalpa, okay, is 17 stories, 207 feet. So not as tall as we used to be here, but the Torre Sky Residence, also in Tegucigalpa at 28. That's the incredible one. I have looked at that building, not like I looked at it for, I might get a place there. I just mean I looked it up before because it was really interesting. And it is a gorgeous, gorgeous building. And then the Crown Plaza, no picture of it. Crown Plazas often have really nice buildings. Okay, nothing fancy, but looks like a nice place. I do want to go to San Pedro Sula sometime soon. Really do. I've been saying that for way too long. Diego says, we do have pretty good civil engineers. If we mention Vancouver in Canada, Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and San Diego in the U.S., hold my beer. Ring of Fire. Yeah, of course. Noelcast 007. Hey, Scott really hates snow. We got about 7 inches last night here in New York Metro. I pledged to never see snow again, and here I am. It took me 20 hours to clean up. Sucks at 20 degrees, no bueno. 2 hours. I was like, oh my gosh. Okay, 2 hours is still pretty awful. In Nicaragua, we don't have tall buildings because of lack of many private investments on it, fear of building high due to the 72 disaster repeat, and also for civilian conflicts that the Nicaraguan government. I think mostly there's no need for it. Right? We sprawl out. Managua had it, and they came down, and it was like, oh no, and they had to rebuild quickly, and so building up has been tough. No one else has any either, right? If you go around the region, there just isn't very much from places that have a lot more forward investment and a lot more dense cities. The lack of dense cities in Nicaragua is a big deal. We're the only one that have the super old colonial cities like Granada and Leon. So, of course, they're not allowed to build up. Masaya is this, traditional city, and so they're not promoted to build up. Managua absolutely would, but that's where the problems lie, right? The ground liquefied. That's a different thing. Liquefaction is different than normal earthquake concerns. So they are very concerned about it there in a slightly different way that we aren't in the rest of the country. Matagalpa is starting to build taller buildings. Esteli just doesn't have the density. Jinotega definitely doesn't have the density. Rivas definitely doesn't have the density. Chinandega definitely doesn't have the density. They're just open space around them. So while they could build them, there's no pressure to. There are no large metropolitan areas to justify it. Whereas if you're up in Honduras, you've got Tegucigalpa and San Pedro Sula, both massive cities, much larger than anything in Nicaragua, and they have a few tall buildings. But that's it, just a few. And so, right, it's you're just not very likely to get many here because it doesn't make sense. Messiah suffered a 5.2 earthquake in 2000 that caused 17 deaths and 5,000 people homeless. Still 25 years ago. It's had bigger ones since and done okay. I mean, the country is huge for 6 million people. There's enough space. Exactly, right? There's just always spreading out. Okay, El Salvador, a little bit taller, with only one major metro. They've got a 14, 13, 16, 15, 14, 18, 18, 18, 19, and a 25. So they're getting there, but they're all right in San Salvador, of course, which is a very urbane city compared to anything here or in Honduras. I really want to check out El Pedregal Multiplaza. Looks super cool. I hate to say it, San Juan del Sur is the obvious place to support that development. I really don't know if that's true. How are they going to support it when every hotel is going out of business and there's all that open space and the property is worth nothing? That's about the last place to put one. It has some potential, but it's really hard to imagine that making sense. Right? Now, the question is, can a large tower in San Juan del Sur generate its own traffic? That is the big question. Can, by having a giant tower, you encourage enough people to go there because of the tower that it will bring in business? Maybe. But a tall tower in San Juan del Sur will more than double the total capacity in a town that has been shrinking for 8 years. That's a big gamble, right? It really is. So it's hard to say. Border Costa Ricans need a new home. Yeah, Costa Ricans don't tend to come here. The factors that led them to Costa Rica tend to make them avoid Nicaragua regardless. Yeah, sell them as condos maybe, but again, right? It's such a property market. Like it's hard to imagine people, right, getting burned putting money into that again. It's so risky that it'll remain unsold and empty, and then it'll be, I bought a condo in this empty tower that's not being maintained. It sounds wonderful. High-rise condo in San Juan del Sur for the right price. That's like, that's. But I could also own a huge property around the corner for a tenth the price and not have to have that condo problem, because condos here are scary. People are scared of condos in Nicaragua because so many people, it's such an uncommon thing, and you're left with so much risk, so much exposure. Is San Juan shrinking? Oh my gosh, it's shrinking. Yeah, we talk about that a lot. It's the hardest hit economic zone in the country. It's been continuously shrinking. I feel like since I first went there in 2015, but definitely since I was there in 2019. Businesses are all closing and going down. Property values are just nothing. No maintenance, you can rent it. That's what, San Juan del Sur? The whole town? That'd be cool. I'm looking at pictures of towers in El Salvador. If only we had the train taking us up there, then we'd be in El Salvador all the time. Shopping, food, bars. A lot of gringos in San Juan del Sur. There are a lot, but a lot fewer than there were. That's the thing, is that there's enough gringos that it drives out the Nicas, but not enough that it makes it sustainable. And part of the problem with the gringos there nothing wrong with this, right. But it is very, very easy to think that by having a lot of gringos, you're going to have a large market. But the problem with gringos in Nicaragua in general is that many, many, many of the expats came here for the budget, right? Well, this is where I can afford, or I want my money to go as far as possible. And so catering to gringos as a business is generally a really bad idea because they spend on average nothing. It's really bad. Diego says, at a certain point, it's kind of good. I would be afraid if the country became dependent on tourism. So it was dependent on tourism. 2015 was ramping up. 2016, 2017, tourism was just exploding. They were going all in, thinking they were the new Costa Rica, and they were. And then suddenly everything dropped out in 2018, 2019, and 2020 with COVID, and tourism just vanished, right? We weren't a big enough place to be able to have the airlines still coming in, for example. And so like when I was coming in and out, I was coming in and out through in Honduras. I was flying into Tegucigalpa and taking cars over the border. That's how hard it was to get here. And so Nicaragua made the very wise move of abandoning tourism as an investment. They're not abandoning it, like they're not making it not allowed, but they stopped investing in it and started investing in real economic factors that actually make sense. And suddenly Nicaragua turned around. And that's the reason why it's crushing its neighbors. Costa Rica stuck to their guns with tourism. And yeah, it's come back mostly, but only mostly. And mostly is a sad place to be 6 years later, right? They've been hurting a long time. And tourism is a really low income economic area, right? Whereas Nicaragua, so Costa Rica is like, can we just get one more person to go to this theme park? Can we get one more person in this restaurant? And they're working on these tight margins and tiny money from Americans who are broadly now super poor. And Nicaragua is like, while you're busy scrambling for pennies, we're going to put loads of beef onto huge ships going to China and reinvent our entire economic and logistics workflow, and have done so. And suddenly we have internet and roads and logistics and shipping and all these things that really make sense. So that loss of San Juan del Sur, I think, is an artifact of the massive turnaround and improvement of the economy. And so what looks like the failure of San Juan del Sur is just a natural side effect of the massive boom of the general Nicaraguan economy. And it says, last time I visited Granada, I saw like 13 American tourists across the street. Now these days I may see it more than a triple. I don't understand that one. Last time I visited Granada, I saw like 13 American tourists across the streets. These days I may see it more than triple. Edwin, I didn't understand that. Diego says, enclaves are a bad idea anyway. If you want to be here, integrate. It's not 100% true, so I am super anti-enclave. So Diego and I are on the same page here. But there are times that a good enclave isn't too bad. And Panama, for example, has one that's pretty large and very isolated in a spot where Panamanians don't want to be. And the thing about it is that by having one good large one, they created a spot for a lot of people who had no interest in Panama, but are willing to put money into Panama in order to live in this enclave. And it generates quite a bit of revenue for Panama and keeps all those people in this isolated spot away from the Panamanians. Everyone wins. So there's cases where it actually works. And the people that lose out when it's done well is just the people in the enclaves. They never get to enjoy the culture. They never get the low cost. They never take advantage of the place. But that's completely on them. And every day they make the decision to do that. So that's totally on them, right? No one's forcing them to do it. Maybe they force them the first day, but that's about it. For everyone else who's like, you know what we don't want is a bunch of non-integrated gringos everywhere. A few, fine, right, especially tourists. But if it's the expats who live here and are like, I don't want to integrate, and are still in the midst of everyone, we have to deal with them all the time, that's not what we want. But like here in Leon, and we're more extreme than most of the places, basically all the expats you're going to run into, which aren't many, are pretty integrated, right? People like Janet, who married famous mancho, right? And is totally part of the community. Or, I think we're pretty integrated, right? We're very much a part of the Sutiava community. Literally had someone from Sutiava pulled up just before I did the live stream and handed me a graduation invite to go to. Her daughter is becoming a doctor in 2 weeks, right? So I have to go to this family thing in Sutiava, right? I get to go to this family thing here in Sutiava. And it's so cool to be a part of the community that, a prominent community figure just pulled up and handed me an invite. And it's all personal. It's like a wedding. It's like a really fancy wedding invite here. Really, really prominent family with a really prominent thing going on. And so it's both a personal honor because they're good friends of ours, but also a community honor to be in this place, right? So many of the expats are in this kind of situation where once you've been here, the ones who have been here for 6 months, no, obviously not, but the ones who have been here for a couple of years, it starts to become home. You start thinking of it as home, treating it as home, being treated as if you're at home, and so forth. And those who go to the enclaves don't get that. And it's always, yes, we're in this little bubble, right? And maybe they don't live in fear of the outside world, but they live in, I don't know, apprehension of it or something. That's the thing. If you become too dependent on tourism, you're in a really shaky position. Not just shaky, which you're right, but it's also your maximum is very low, right? Costa Rica doesn't have a way to make it richer. So if costs go up, they just get poorer. And that's where they kind of are now. They can't bring in more tourists, really. They're kind of saturating the place. If they start bringing in more, they'll start spending less. And already they're spending less because the U.S. is getting poorer. So that's not Costa Rica's fault. It's just an exposure they have. But that's the thing, is that Costa Rica has basically maxed out tourism. They're like the perfect tourism country. They have all the infrastructure for it. They have wonderful places to go see and do. They've kept it all green. The whole country's dedicated to it. They're flooded with tourists. Now what do? It got them to a certain level. They have no way to get past that level. And so now they're like, what do we do? And that's where they are. And then once the tourism took a dive in any way, it was really bad because their margins are slim. So they didn't have really the buffer to handle it. Whereas Nicaragua, because it was doing a lot of different things already, when it lost the tourism, it was like, okay, that hurts, but we have all these other things to absorb it. And that's what they've been doing and to great effect. Nika says there's a tourism town in Mexico that it's bankrupting and everyone is making fun of them. I don't know what town that would be. All right, guys, we've been on for 2.5 hours. My gosh, these ad hoc live streams just go for forever, but no one's interrupting me to go do anything, so I'm like just going. So anyway, we covered our topics. Thank you so much for coming on. Remember to give a thumbs up to the live stream. It does help. Even if you're on TV, just use the remote, go up and hit it right now because we're going to close the live stream here in a second. Really appreciate everyone who is on. It's great to have you here. Great discussions, good stuff, lots of views. Share on social media. Tell someone about the show, please. If you'd like to help support us here financially, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Scott Allen Miller. And I'm actually going to type this in, buymeacoffee.com/Scott Allen Miller. You can click that link or go into the episode notes. Find the stuff you need there for anything you need. Send in videos of yourself. There's a YouTuber that bought land outside of Quito. He says his neighbors don't view him as the gringo. They see him as their gringo. That must be way outside of Quito. No, that's okay. Quito is, I think, quite a bit less. I don't know Ecuador that well, but I feel like Quito isn't as overrun with gringos as many places. I actually only get called gringo by Americans. Americans who try to disparage people who come to Nicaragua use the term. Here in Nicaragua, I have not been called a gringo for years. Literally. I have been called it, but it's been quite some time and never derogatory. What things would you fix about the country? I'd definitely revamp the education system. Education is big. Right, getting that way more technical, way more deep, way more business, way less time. Get it a lot more like Finland. Those are that education for sure. Get the wages of teachers up, but that's magic, right? Let's just raise everybody's. Where's that money gonna come from, right? But that would be something. Get those wages up, make it a little bit more in demand. Litter is a huge thing. Doing big campaigns for keeping the country clean and having real penalties for people who don't. Animal control and safety. They do a lot to try to do, but there's more that could be done for sure. honestly, so much about Nicaragua isn't what I would fix. It's giving it time to get there or giving it the resources to do it. They're doing. Oh, Tulum. Tulum. What a crappy place. I remember when it was like newly discovered because my CEO is from there, right? She's from Cancun. And so Tulum is right there. And like 8 years ago, it was a new up and coming thing. And she's like, yeah, let's go to Tulum. We'll hang out. It'll be fun. And then before we ever went, it turned into this just trash place that it's, I mean, it's embarrassing to have gone to Tulum. You have to be like, it feels like you'd be a huge loser and want to hide it. Like, I've not been to Tulum or go there to make fun of it. Like, it's just goofy, right? What a joke of a thing. I had not heard that they were going bankrupt, though. That is funny. Crisis stems from a combination of overdevelopment, high prices, infrastructure issues, security concerns, and environmental problems. Many developers going bankrupt. It's so funny because Tulum barely got past like, oh yeah, that little unknown place outside of Cancun. Instantly, it was unaffordable, nasty gringo haven, and now it's bankrupt, just like that. If I'm talking to you about with my mother, I call you a gringo. Oh, actually, that's true. Marcella's neighbor referred to me as a gringo to her today, but not to me. So I didn't hear it, but she did mention that, but not in a derogatory way, of course. Just saying it. If I'm talking to you, I'd call you by your name. Yeah. But definitely, like Americans will call me gringo all the time, derogatory, and I'm always like, you're very confused about gringo. Like, to you, I'm not a gringo. To an American, right? Like gringo means foreigner. So I'm not a gringo when I'm in America, and to an American, I'm not a gringo. And to an American, talking in the context of Nicaragua, they're as much gringo as I am. And what's really funny though is that if you're like a Nicaraguan and you move to America, I get to call you gringo because that's the correct Spanish. So it's really funny because quite often I'm called gringo by gringos in a context where I'm not the gringo and they are. I'm really not. I would. Okay, so Diego, I do know if I had my druthers, if I was in charge, I would allow drones. That would be. I think there's a lot of promotion not being done because every country around gets to show. Obviously, things that they're talking about doing or they're planning on doing, I would be very, very, very heavily pushing for. Okay. So I have some things, right, Diego? This is not my grand plan for Nicaragua. Well, it's my grand plan. I don't know that these are the top priorities for Nicaragua. Obviously, education, very big. One, I would start by outlawing cars on Ometepe. I would use that as a all-in green project. For those who don't know, if you've been to Ometepe, you'd be like, okay, I can see this. And go to really, really simple public transportation and private electric transportation. I want it quiet. I want it slow. I want it safe and ecologically friendly. I would push to get all the ferries back open. That's a tough one, but hopefully it would work. I would push like crazy to get not only the old trains back in, but a full system of new fast trains. Not super fast, not like high-speed trains. That would be cool, but they're completely impractical here. But I would push, hopefully with the neighboring countries, to make an interconnected network. But even if it's only Nicaragua, I want trains that go as many places in the country as possible. And when not, I want buses that are extremely well labeled so that anybody at any time can go anywhere in the country without any additional research, right? Like everything has simple labels and apps that show you everything. These are very doable, right? And Diego, like you and I could sit down and in a month come up with some of this stuff. Not putting science on collecting the data is the hard part, but the government could just make it happen. Once trains are in place, I would start in some of the small places like San Juan, San Juan del Sur for sure, but Las Penitas as well, Popoyo, and start within the island. What's the description of that? not riparian. I can't believe it. Insular, non-insular. Is that the right term? Yes, non-insular Nicaragua. I would start outlawing cars, except for deliveries, right? And just then start rolling through the cities. Then do the Granada and Leon and Acatal right away. Make those pedestrian only with taxis and all kinds of different things, but get the cars off the road, all of them. Start pushing towards electric infrastructure and um, self-driving cars. Right now, this takes years, right? So I'm not talking about doing this today. I'm talking about 5 years from now. That's if I was suddenly getting to make infrastructure decisions, that would be a absolutely huge thing that I'd be doing. Getting that done and moving towards a public transportation network, so that the goal being about 5 years, no private cars in the country. Make Costa Rica ashamed at how much more green we are and how much safer we are and how much cheaper it is to get across the country. I want to go to San Juan del Sur, $3. I want to go to Bluefields, $5, right? Completely comfort. I want to rival European trains. I want to make South America jealous. I want to make Mexico beg to connect to our network. I want to be a world showcase in public transportation, right? And make it all super clear, super easy, so that tourists use it, gringos use it, Nicas use it, and are excited to use it. Make it run through the night. Make every bit of the country able to go to Managua and use it in the middle of the night if they need to, or to get back. That we could go to shows at Teatro Nacional, get out late, go out eating, go to a club until 3 o'clock in the morning, stumble into the train station, and go to any city in the country in the middle of the night safely, quickly, easily by train. We can do that in Europe. Why not do it here? We're so much smaller. That'd be so freaking cool. And of course, hopefully getting shipments going around the country faster and easier. And from a technology perspective, I want to get data centers that are directly powered by the volcanoes that are sitting with source water cooling systems, and get new data connections directly to Costa Rica, directly to Honduras, directly to El Salvador, and make sure that that link makes it to the CDMX data centers for Cloudflare, and the Costa Rican equivalents, and if possible, extend to Panama and give ourselves an interconnect situation here, where we're the data center central for the region rather than the backwater. That's tougher, but the fiber is very doable. And make the Miami link the backup rather than the primary. So those are the big changes that I would make. I totally agree. Education, very big. Getting things clean. There's a lot of little things that can be done, but getting cars off the road. Nicaragua is the lowest car utilization in the region, and it shows. It's such a big factor in how nice it is here, and it's something that if we're not careful, we're going to lose that advantage. And it would be great to see that reverse and go all the way the other way, and just be the showcase for everything happening in the region. And that's totally right, a matched agenda to everything you see here, right? How do we make things better for everyone? How do we make it safer? How do we make it cheaper? How do we make it more efficient? How do we make it that people don't have to go out and somehow be able to afford cars? How do we make it that everybody's comfortable walking down the streets and just living in their neighborhoods and doing all that, yet be able to utilize the country? All right, guys, we already did most of the sign off. That derailed me. I do have to go do my Duolingo, do have to go hang out with my kids, and I will see all of you tomorrow.